Chapter 2087. Second floor. Resting room. The coffin was still placed at the door. Feng Yuan sat in front of the tea table and said to Mu Tianyong, "Close the door." Close the door? Mu Tianyong felt more and more uneasy. He turned around and closed the door, then stood at the door and looked at Feng Yuan silently. Feng Yuan waved his hand and said, "Don't be so restrained. Come and sit." "That's not right." Mu Tianyong was a little hesitant. "This old man told you to sit. Sit down quickly." Feng Yuan raised his eyebrows. "Yes." Mu Tianyong hurriedly ran to the tea table and sat opposite Feng Yuan, trembling with fear. In fact, he was pretending to be afraid. Although in terms of strength, he was thousands of miles away from Feng Yuan, as an imperial emperor, he was born with courage that ordinary people did not have. Feng Yuan's aura was not enough to suppress him. However, there was a saying that when one was under the eaves, one had to lower one's head. Sometimes one had to pretend to be weak. Feng Yuan made tea and asked, "Just now, you said that if this old man needs anything, I will tell you, right?" "Yes." Mu Tianyong nodded. "It was just a joke." "Did he take it seriously?" "Good. From now on, follow this old man. This old man will guarantee that you will have a meteoric rise in the Empyrean Palace." Feng Yuan said. "This?" Mu Tianyong's expression went blank. "Wasn't this a little too direct? At least be a little more tactful." Feng Yuan said, "I don't like to beat around the bush." Mu Tianyong pondered for a while and said, "Temple Master, this is a little too sudden. Moreover, I don't think you will trust me." Feng Yuan poured 2 cups of tea. He pushed 1 cup in front of Mu Tianyong and picked up the other cup himself. He placed it at the tip of his nose and sniffed it. Then he took a sip and said, "Of course I won't trust you." "Then why do you want me to follow you?" Mu Tianyong frowned. "Don't you know that there is a kind of control secret technique in this world that can control others' lives?" Feng Yuan said. "You want to control me?" Mu Tianyong immediately stood up and glared at Feng Yuan. Feng Yuan said indifferently, "Don't be agitated. Sit down." Mu Tianyong didn't sit down. He even wanted to turn around and leave. What a joke. As a god monarch, how could he allow his life to be in the hands of others? "I told you to sit down. Didn't you hear me?" Feng Yuan's gaze turned cold, and his tone carried a commanding tone. Mu Tianyong raised his eyebrows imperceptibly and returned to his seat. "Don't get too worked up. Actually, this old man doesn't want to control you, and this old man has never controlled anyone before. But I'm sure you know that Gu Yong's betrayal was a huge blow to this old man. You might not know this, but those who are familiar with this old man know how well this old man treats Gu Yong. Not only did I promote and nurture him, I even took care of his family. It can be said that this old man treats him like my own son. But I never expected that he would betray me. Facing this matter, this old man's heart is pained. I also learned from it that apart from family, there is no one in this world that is worthy of trust. Sometimes, you can't even trust your family. So, you have to understand this old man," Feng Yuan said. Mu Tianyong frowned. "I can understand your feelings, but I'm a person who doesn't like being controlled by others. But you have to know that sometimes, it's not up to you to choose. But don't worry. After this old man controls you, I won't force you to do anything. Everything depends on your willingness. Of course, if you follow me, we have to be of the same mind. Whether it's my enemy or your enemy, they are all our common enemies." Feng Yuan smiled. "This?" Mu Tianyong hesitated. "A wise man submits to circumstances. There's no harm in following this old man. If you really can't make a decision now, I can give you a few days to consider," Feng Yuan said. Mu Tianyong pondered for a moment and looked up at Feng Yuan. "Are you sure you won't force me?" "Of course." Feng Yuan nodded. Mu Tianyong added, "Can you guarantee that I'll have a meteoric rise?" "I can immediately appoint you as the manager of the resource hall. In other words, apart from me, everyone in the resource hall will have to obey your orders," Feng Yuan said. "That's like being above everyone else." Mu Tianyong was slightly tempted. "Yes, that's right. Beneath one person and above all others." Feng Yuan nodded. "All right." Mu Tianyong clenched his teeth and said, "As long as you keep your word, I'll follow you. You're indeed a smart man. Feng Yuan chuckled and performed a hand seal. A black seal the size of a baby's palm was swiftly formed. The seal was a pentagram with a dark glow, emitting an eerie aura. Feng Yuan said, "This is the soul-controlling technique, able to control one's god's soul." Soul-controlling technique? Mu Tianyong observed the black seal and frowned. I know quite a few soul-controlling techniques. Each of them has their own strengths. May I ask, Hall Master, what's the strength of this soul-controlling technique? The strength of this soul-controlling technique is that after being controlled, I can erase the other party's god's soul with just a thought. Feng Yuan said. It's similar to the slave seal, Mu Tianyong mumbled and asked curiously. I've heard of some soul-controlling techniques that can peek into the other party's thoughts and sense the other party's location. There is such a soul-controlling technique. However, such soul-controlling techniques are very rare. From what I've heard, only legendary-level soul-controlling techniques have this ability. Feng Yuan said. What? Only legendary-level soul-controlling techniques have this ability. Does that mean the slave seal is legendary level? Mu Tianyong was secretly shocked. He had not expected the slave seal to be so terrifying. What's wrong? Are you afraid that I'll peek into your inner thoughts? Feng Yuan looked at Mu Tianyong and asked. If I don't do anything wrong, I won't be afraid of ghosts knocking on my door. What am I afraid of? I'm just curious. I also want to see if there's a chance to get such a soul-controlling technique. Mu Tianyong said with a smile. Feng Yuan said, don't even think about it. Even the martial arts treasury doesn't have such a soul-controlling technique. It might not even exist in the entire North region. A trace of disappointment crept onto Mu Tianyong's face. Enough. Relax your mind and don't resist. The process may be a little painful, but it will be over soon. After Feng Yuan finished speaking, he waved his hand, and the black seal turned into a stream of light and entered Mu Tianyong's head. Mu Tianyong's body trembled immediately. His hands stared at the armrest of the chair, and his face was full of pain. However, he did not even make a sound during the entire process. It could be seen that his willpower was not inferior to Qin Feiyong's. In less than a few breaths, the control was completed. Feng Yuan also smiled. He looked at Mu Tianyong and said, since you have followed me, I won't treat you unfairly. Feng Yuan took out an interspatial ring and threw it to Mu Tianyong. What's this? Mu Tianyong caught the interspatial ring and looked at Feng Yuan suspiciously. Feng Yuan smiled and said, these are the soul stones that I carry with me. There are about 2 to 300 million. 2 to 300 million. Mu Tianyong's eyes trembled. He immediately checked the interspatial ring and was stunned. There were indeed a mountain of soul stones in the interspatial ring. Are they all for me? After a while, Mu Tianyong came back to his senses. He looked up at Feng Yuan and asked in disbelief. Yes. Feng Yuan nodded. Thank you, Temple Master. Mu Tianyong immediately got up and bowed to thank him. Feng Yuan waved his hand and smiled. We're all on the same side. There's no need to be so polite. By the way, I heard you say that you were forced to be with Jiang Haotian and the others. Why? It's a long story. Actually, Jiang Haotian and I have known each other for a long time, and we have always been rivals. Mu Tianyong sighed. Then why did Jiang Rushuang call you a heartless man in public when you entered Empyrean Palace? Feng Yuan was suspicious. It's their plan. Since Jiang Haotian and Feng Zijuan had a conflict in the treasure pavilion, Jiang Haotian knew that you would not let him go. So, he wanted to drag me down with him to share some of the pressure. You've seen his methods. He's extremely scheming. I can't beat him at all. Mu Tianyong sighed deeply. There was a trace of grievance in his expression. I see. Feng Yuan suddenly understood and asked suspiciously, then what's his background? Mu Tianyong said, he's the same as me, born in a small village. However, due to our good talent and luck, we've managed to obtain quite a bit of good fortune. That's why we've slowly reached where we are today. Feng Yuan said meaningfully, your luck isn't an ordinary kind of good. What do you mean? Mu Tianyong was suspicious. When you entered Empyrean Palace for the test, this old man was also observing in the conference hall. Your dagger should be a legendary divine weapon, right? Feng Yuan said. This Mu Tianyong was a little flustered. Don't worry. Although legendary divine weapons are rare, it's not like this old man doesn't have any. Feng Yuan smiled faintly. What? You also have a legendary divine weapon? Mu Tianyong was shocked. Of course. After all, this old man is a hall master, the ruler of Empyrean Palace. How can I not have a trump card? And not only this old man, Shangguan Fenglan, the 10 great elders, and so on all have terrifying trump cards. Feng Yuan said. Mu Tianyong's face was blank. Waves were rolling in his heart. It seemed that he had underestimated Empyrean Palace. All right then, go and do your work. This old man will arrange for you to be in charge of the resource hall. In the future, you'll be the manager of the resource hall. Feng Yuan smiled. Thank you, Hallmaster, for your help. Mu Tianyong quickly got up and said respectfully. Feng Yuan said, this is just a small benefit. As long as you work hard for this old man, there will be bigger surprises in the future. Yes. Mu Tianyong nodded, but after pondering for a while he said, but Hallmaster, I feel that I shouldn't be in charge of the resource hall for the time being. Why? Feng Yuan looked at him doubtfully. 2 reasons. First, I just came to the resource hall. If I become the manager of the resource hall, the others won't be convinced. Second, Jiang Haotian. A cold light flashed in Mu Tianyong's eyes. Chapter 2088. Jiang Haotian. Feng Yuan was taken aback. He took a sip from his teacup and looked at Mu Tianyong. I'd like to hear the details. You said it just now. After following you, whether it's your enemy or my enemy, they are our common enemy. So now, I naturally have to help you get rid of this person. But I know this person too well. Ordinary means can't deal with him at all. So, I plan to lurk around him for the time being. Mu Tianyong said. Lurk. Feng Yuan frowned. Because of senior brother Jean, I have gained his trust. If you let me manage the resource hall now, it's equivalent to telling him that I betrayed him. This way, I won't be able to deal with him in the future. On the contrary, if I continue to lurk around him now, my chances will be much higher. Mu Tianyong smiled. Feng Yuan laughed happily and said, this old man really didn't misjudge you. You're a talent. All right, I'll do as you say. Thank you for your trust, Palace Master. This disciple will definitely not disappoint Palace Master's expectations. Mu Tianyong said solemnly. Good, good, good. Go back to him now. If there's anything, immediately report to this old man. Feng Yuan said. Yes. Mu Tianyong nodded, then took out the image crystal. After establishing the contract bridge, Mu Tianyong turned and left the lounge. Feng Yuan walked to the door and looked at Mu Tianyong's back with a trace of a smile in his eyes. With the soul control technique, he wasn't afraid of Mu Tianyong. Then, he lowered his head and looked at the 2 coffins on the ground. The smile in his eyes disappeared and was replaced by killing intent. Blood for blood, this old man will definitely make you regret it for the rest of your life. Outside, Qin Feiyang and Xueqi were holding a rag and wiping the doors and windows of the resource hall. After Mu Tianyong walked out, he immediately ran in front of the 2 with a face full of anger and grievance. He said, the 2 of you are too much. We clearly did it together, but in the end, you actually want me to take the blame alone? It's just a small matter. Is there a need to be so angry? Qin Feiyang said with a smile. Small matter? If you have the ability, why don't you go to Feng Yuan and tell him that you did it alone? Mu Tianyong said angrily. Qin Feiyang and Xueqi looked at each other and smiled awkwardly. Xueqi threw a rag to Mu Tianyong and curiously asked, Brother Mu, you and Feng Yuan have been chatting for so long, what did you talk about? Mu Tianyong glanced at the 2 of them and snorted, I'm not telling you. Still angry? Xueqi stared blankly for a moment before helplessly saying, All right, all right, all right. We were wrong before. We apologize to you. Mu Tianyong said expressionlessly, An apology is enough? You should at least show some sincerity. You're a grown man. Is there a need for that? Xueqi was speechless. Yes. Mu Tianyong nodded. Xueqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mu Tianyang turned around and wiped the door and window with the rag while saying, I won't hide it from you. I've been bribed by Feng Yuan. What? Xueqi was stunned. Qin Feiyong frowned and said, Are you sure you're not joking with us? No. Mu Tianyang shook his head. Xueqi said angrily, Damn, how can you be like this? We trusted you so much, but you actually betrayed us? All of you have joined forces to make me the scapegoat. Why should I still wallow in the mire with all of you? Mu Tianyang sneered. Qin Feiyong raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, Mu Tianyang, I'm not joking with you. I'm not joking with you either. I've really been bribed by him. He even gave me 200 or 300 million soul stones. Mu Tianyang said. Brother Jiang, did you see that? This person is unreliable. Xueqi looked at Mu Tianyang with disdain. Qin Feiyong looked at Xueqi and then looked at Mu Tianyang. His eyes flashed with a smile as he said, Brother Hua, you've misunderstood. He didn't betray us. He didn't. Xueqi was stunned and said. He said it himself. Qin Feiyong said, Think about it. If he really betrayed us, would he still be standing here and cleaning with us? That makes sense. Xueqi nodded. Mu Tianyang rolled his eyes at Xueqi and said, Grow a brain and think about it. If I really betrayed you, you'd all be corpses now. Xueqi pouted. Qin Feiyong asked, Mu Tianyang, what's going on? It's true that I was bribed by him and he gave me soul stones. He also used a secret technique called soul controlling technique to control me. However, I don't really want to follow him. Mu Tianyang said. Qin Feiyong was shocked. What? You were actually controlled by him? It's nothing. I've inquired about this soul controlling technique in advance. It can only control my divine soul. It can't peek into my inner thoughts or sense my location. Mu Tianyang said. Qin Feiyong frowned. Even so, it's too dangerous. Don't you still have the enslavement seal? When the time comes, use the enslavement seal to help me remove it. Mu Tianyang said. Qin Feiyong said, But I'm not sure if the enslavement seal can remove the soul-controlling technique. It definitely can. Because according to my inquiry, your enslavement seal is very likely to be a legendary level control technique. Mu Tianyang said. Legendary level? Qin Feiyong was stunned. And I also learned from Feng Yuan that not only does he have a legendary level artifact, but even Shangguan Fenglan and the others also have one. These people are not easy to deal with. Mu Tianyang sighed, quite worried. Qin Feiyong and Xueqi looked at each other, and their pupils couldn't help but shrink. They all had legendary level artifacts. Wasn't this a little too terrifying? But it doesn't matter. With our means, as long as we work together, we can definitely nibble away at Feng Yuan step by step. Mu Tianyang sneered. Then I'll have to trouble you. Qin Feiyong smiled. Mu Tianyang said indifferently, As long as you don't be ungrateful in the future. Qin Feiyong smiled. He still knew what was important and what was important. Dealing with Feng Yuan was the most important thing. However, he also understood in his heart that Mu Tianyang approached Feng Yuan not entirely to deal with Feng Yuan, but the biggest reason was still the soul vein. Because only by gaining Feng Yuan's trust could he find out where the soul vein of Nine Heavens Palace was hidden in the fastest speed. Time flew by. The three of them spent half a day and finally cleaned the resource hall and the square. Originally, they wanted to take the opportunity to clean the warehouse, but they were stopped by Feng Yuan, who directly said that the warehouse was not a place they could go. The three of them did not insist and officially worked in the resource hall. In fact, the work in the resource hall was very simple. It was either keeping accounts, helping the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace to exchange for soul stones, or issuing tasks, tidying up the warehouse, or distributing soul stones. After familiarizing themselves with the work process, Qin Feiyong and Xueqi arranged to help the disciples exchange for soul stones. For example, if the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace brought precious herbs or rare treasures to the resource hall, they would be responsible for appraising and exchanging them for soul stones. As for Mu Tianyang's work, that was even simpler, which was to distribute soul stones. And this distribution of soul stones was the soul stones that the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace received every month. Although this work was simple, it was very cumbersome and the workload was also huge. After all, there were too many disciples of Nine Heavens Palace, and they were busy every day. Just like Qin Feiyang and Xueqi, from time to time, there would be people bringing all kinds of strange things to the resource hall to exchange for soul stones. The most important thing was that you could not misestimate the price. If it was too low, the disciples would definitely be unhappy. If it was too high, Feng Yuan would definitely not forgive them. After this first day, the three of them were quite tired. When they returned to the cave at night, they did not even want to cultivate, lying on the bed and sleeping soundly. The next 2 days. A shocking news spread in Nine Heavens Palace. Hey, do you know? The treasure pavilion is going to auction a pill called 4 Symbols Infinite Divine Pill. This pill can let War God break through cultivation. What? There's such a pill in the world? This news has already spread throughout the entire North region. It's absolutely true. When will the auction be held? In 2 days, the location will be at Sky Dragon City's treasure pavilion. And it's said that the treasure pavilion has changed the previous rules and will be auctioning with soul stones. Soul stones? Who can afford that? Whether or not I can afford it, I have to go and take a look. It's too incredible. If you want to go, you have to make an appointment in advance. Otherwise, if it's too crowded, you won't even have the chance to enter the treasure pavilion. How could a pill that could let War God break through not be tempting? Almost all the disciples below Monarch God were rubbing their hands together. The night before the auction, there was already a long line on the street in front of the treasure pavilion's entrance. And it was also in the evening that Qin Feiyang dragged his tired body back to the cave. But once he entered the cave, he could not help but be stunned. He saw a woman sitting in the guest hall. The woman was tall and her black hair was like a waterfall. Her tender skin was like a fairy. Qin Feiyang came back to his senses and hurriedly closed the cave's stone door. He walked in front of the woman and bowed. Greetings, Hall Master. That's right. This woman was Shangguan Fenglan. Shangguan Fenglan looked at Qin Feiyang with a smile and asked, "How do you feel after entering the resource hall these 2 days?" "I'm regretting it. Why didn't you cultivate properly? Why did you go to that damned place to join in the fun?" Qin Feiyang shook his head. Shangguan Fenglan smiled. "It's sweet after the bitter." "I hope so." Qin Feiyang sighed and said with a smile, "Hall Master, you didn't come here to care about me, right?" "Of course. No." Shangguan Fenglan said. Qin Feiyang's brows flashed with a hint of doubt. He said, "Then may I ask what orders you have, Hall Master?" Shangguan Fenglan said, "There's something I want to ask you. Send a message to Mu Tianyang first and ask him to come over as well." "Okay." Qin Feiyang nodded, took out the image crystal, and sent a message to Mu Tianyang. After Mu Tianyang received the message, he was also puzzled. However, he did not dare to delay and immediately rushed over. Chapter 2089. A moment passed. Mu Tianyang finally arrived. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Lord Temple Master." Shangguan Fenglan nodded and looked at Qin Feiyang. "Close the door." Qin Feiyang waved his hand and the stone door closed tightly. Shangguan Fenglan condensed another boundary that enveloped the entire cave abode. Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang looked at each other with a trace of surprise in their eyes. Wasn't this too cautious? Shangguan Fenglan sized up the boundary and glanced at the two. She smiled faintly and said, "Sit. It's better for us to stand." Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang smiled embarrassedly. They were a little nervous after being teased by Shangguan Fenglan. Shangguan Fenglan shook her head and smiled. "Don't be nervous. This is not bad news for you. On the contrary, it's a good fortune." "Good fortune?" Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang looked at each other. This woman would give them a good fortune? She must be kidding. Shangguan Fenglan said, "You should know about the Purple Gold Divine Pagoda." "Yes. That's where the Heaven Roll disciples are." Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang nodded. Shangguan Fenglan asked, "Do you want to go in?" "Of course." Mu Tianyang nodded without hesitation. However, Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows without a trace. To be honest, he was not interested in the Purple Gold Divine Pagoda at all. Because even the time array on the 10th floor of the Purple Gold Divine Pagoda could not compare to the ancient castle. But why did Shangguan Fenglan suddenly ask such a question? Shangguan Fenglan smiled and said, "If you want to go in, you have a chance this time." "What chance?" Mu Tianyang was a little anxious. Shangguan Fenglan said, "The first elder said to make an exception and let you enter the purple gold divine pagoda. He will also give you 100,000 soul stones every month." This? Mu Tianyang was stunned. Not only let them enter the purple gold divine pagoda, but also give them 100,000 soul stones every month? This was a pie falling from the sky. Wait a minute. How could the first elder, this old fox, be so kind? There must be something fishy going on. There was definitely something fishy going on. Mu Tianyang was not an idiot. After thinking carefully, he calmed down and transmitted his voice. "Qin Feiyang, what do you think this woman and the great elder are playing?" "Who knows?" Qin Feiyang replied. "How is it? This treatment isn't bad, right?" Shangguan Fenglan looked at the two of them and asked with a smile. "Not bad indeed." Mu Tianyang nodded and said with a smile, "But I don't think it's for free." "Of course. There is no such thing as a free lunch anywhere in the world. However, Great Elder only has a small request." Shangguan Fenglan smiled. A small request? The two of them looked at each other, their faces full of suspicion. Shangguan Fenglan said, "Grand Elder wants the pill formula of the four symbols infinite divine pill." Ugh. Qin Feiyang and Qin Feng were dumbfounded. This was still considered a small request? "I also know that Great Elder is forcing you to do something you don't want. However, he doesn't mean to force you, he just wants me to ask for your opinion. But then again, you are now disciples of the Nine Heavens Palace. It's only right that you contribute to the Nine Heavens Palace, right?" Shangguan Fenglan smiled. Mu Tianyang said, "That's not right." "What's wrong?" Shangguan Fenglan was puzzled. "Why did we enter the Nine Heavens Palace? Isn't it to get a better cultivation environment and resources, as well as the protection of big shots like you? Why do you want us to contribute now? Besides, we weren't directly recruited by you. We passed the test set by you and went through untold hardships to get in. In other words, whether it was before or after we entered the Nine Heavens Palace, you didn't give us any help. It's all because of our own ability that we were able to get to where we are today. Then why do you want us to contribute to the Nine Heavens Palace now?" Mu Tianyang said. These words were ruthless, causing Shangguan Fenglan's expression to turn ugly. Qin Feiyang nodded and said, "Brother Mu's words are reasonable." "Shut up." Mu Tianyang, "I admit that I didn't help him, but you. Back then, if it wasn't for me, you would have died in Feng Wenhai's hands before we entered the Nine Heavens Palace." Shangguan Fenglan said angrily. "That's a little pompous. Selfless help, that's true help. And you saved me because you wanted me to deal with Feng Yuan. This is an equal trade, how can it be considered help?" Qin Feiyang said. Shangguan Fenglan fell silent. Because she couldn't find a reason to refute. From the beginning, she and Qin Feiyang had a relationship of mutual benefit. "There are a few unpleasant words that I have to say, so don't be angry." Qin Feiyang suddenly spoke again. Shangguan Fenglan raised her head and looked at Qin Feiyang, saying, "Go ahead." Qin Feiyang said, "I think, compared to the treasure pavilion, you are too weak, especially the first elder." "What do you mean?" Shangguan Fenglan frowned. "Your sister Shangguan Qiu must have told the deputy pavilion master and the pavilion master about the four symbols infinite divine pill. But look at them. Until now, they haven't come to us, and they haven't even mentioned the pill formula. But what about the first elder? The first thing he thought of was to take the pill formula from us. I just can't figure it out. We are both giants of the northern region, but why is the gap so big?" Qin Feiyang said. "You..." Shangguan Fenglan's face was full of anger. "Don't mess around. We agreed in advance that you can't be angry. Furthermore, I am targeting the first elder, and not you, Hallmaster." Qin Feiyang hurriedly stretched out his hand, his face full of vigilance. Shangguan Fenglan shook her head and laughed, then shook her head and sighed. "Actually, the first elder wants the pill formula not for himself, but for the entire Empyrean Palace." "I know. After all, only Mu Tianyang and I know how to refine the four symbols infinite divine pill. And now, Mu Tianyang and I are cooperating with the Treasure Pavilion. If the Empyrean Palace wants the 4 symbols infinite divine pill, they can only buy it from the Treasure Pavilion at a high price. In other words, the wealth of the Empyrean Palace will gradually be transferred to the Treasure Pavilion. In the long run, the development of the Treasure Pavilion will definitely be faster than the Empyrean Palace, or even surpass it. Qin Feiyang said. When Shangguan Fenglan heard this, she looked rather surprised. She didn't expect this boy to be so far-sighted. Qin Feiyang said again, "But what does this have to do with me? I just want to find a place to cultivate in peace. If the Empyrean Palace can't even give me this, then what's the point of staying in the Empyrean Palace? Brother Jiang, why don't we go to the Treasure Pavilion? I believe that the people there won't force us to hand over the pill formula." Mu Tianyang suddenly said. Qin Feiyang was stunned, then slapped his head and said in annoyance, "Why didn't I think of that? Good idea." "Shut up!" Shangguan Fenglan immediately reprimanded, glancing at the closed stone door. "You'd better bury this kind of words in your stomachs in the future. Otherwise, when it falls into the first elder's ears, you'll suffer." Just kidding, just kidding. We don't have the guts." Qin Feiyang and Shangguan Fenglan laughed awkwardly. "Better not. Although you have outstanding talent, in the Northern Territory, your life and death are in the hands of the First Elder," Shangguan Fenglan said in a low voice. "Understood. The Deputy Pavilion Master is a good example." Qin Feiyang nodded and smiled. With the protection of the Treasure Pavilion Master, the Deputy Pavilion Master still lost a leg. It was not hard to imagine how terrifying the First Elder's means were. "Shut up! Don't mention the Deputy Pavilion Master again," Shangguan Fenglan shouted again. "Yes, yes, yes." Qin Feiyang nodded repeatedly. Shangguan Fenglan exhaled and asked, "You really don't agree to contribute the pill formula?" Both of them nodded without hesitation. Shangguan Fenglan looked at the two of them deeply, then got up and said, "Well, I'll report to the First Elder as it is. I can't predict what will happen in the end." Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "I believe the First Elder will make a wise choice." "You're not worried at all." Shangguan Fenglan smiled coldly, then dispelled the barrier and left quickly. After Shangguan Fenglan left, Qin Feiyang said angrily, "As expected, there's trouble again." Mu Tianyang frowned and said, "What if the First Elder really forces us to hand over the pill formula?" Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and asked, "What do you think we should do?" "I won't give the pill formula to him anyway." Mu Tianyang sneered. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "I thought you would say that you have no choice but to give it to him." "You must be kidding. What's in it for us if we give the pill formula to him? The 100,000 soul stones per month is not worth mentioning compared to the share we get with the Treasure Pavilion. As for the purple gold divine pagoda, to be honest, I don't care too much about it." Mu Tianyang's face was full of disdain, but suddenly his eyes rolled and he smiled slyly. "If they can snatch your ancient castle and give it to me, I'll definitely agree." Naive. After the ancient castle is sealed, even I can't take it out, let alone them. Besides, even if they have a way to take it out, do you think they'll give you such a heaven-defying treasure? Qin Feiyang sneered. Mu Tianyang shook his head helplessly. "That's right. If the big shots of the Ninth Heaven Palace knew that the time array in the ancient castle was even more terrifying than the purple gold divine pagoda, they would definitely take it for themselves. 1 day was equal to 1 year. How heaven-defying was that? Forget it. I'll go back first. Let me know if anything happens." After saying that, Mu Tianyang turned into a stream of light and flew out of the cave like lightning, disappearing without a trace. Deep in the Ninth Heaven Palace, Shangguan Fenglan stood respectfully in front of the First Elder. The First Elder, on the other hand, was sitting on a chair with his head lowered. He was silent and his expression was uncertain. After a long time, the First Elder looked up at Shangguan Fenglan and frowned. Facing the temptation of the purple gold divine pagoda and 100,000 soul stones per month, they really aren't moved at all? At first, they were a little tempted, but when I asked them to contribute the pill formula of the 4 symbols infinite divine pill, they directly refused. Shangguan Fenglan smiled helplessly. "Did you tell them that there's a time array in the purple gold divine pagoda?" The First Elder asked. "All the disciples of the Ninth Heaven Palace know about this. Do I still need to say it?" Shangguan Fenglan smiled bitterly. Then what's going on? The first elder was stunned. They could actually refuse the temptation of a time array. Chapter 2090. Shangguan Fenglan pondered for a moment and said, Great Elder, I think we can't force them. They are disciples of our Nine Heavens Palace. Is it wrong for this old man to ask them to contribute the pill recipe? Besides, this old man didn't ask for it for nothing. I also gave them a lot of benefits. Great Elder said angrily. But they may not care about the benefits you gave them. It's better to let nature take its course. In case. At this point, for some reason, Shangguan Fenglan suddenly stopped. Not only was there a trace of fear on her face, but there was also a trace of regret. In case what? Great Elder was suspicious. This? Shangguan Fenglan hesitated. There's no harm in saying it. Great Elder said. Shangguan Fenglan took a deep breath, looked at Great Elder and said, In case we repeat the mistakes of Qin Batian. Great Elder's face suddenly became gloomy. I knew you would be angry when I mentioned this person, but I can't deny that our Nine Heavens Palace was too strong back then. Otherwise, he wouldn't have disappeared. If he hadn't disappeared, then with his talent, I'm afraid he would have been in existence at the level of Palace Master or Vice Palace Master by now. Shangguan Fenglan sighed. Enough, enough. This old man doesn't want to hear this name again. Great Elder waved his hand impatiently. Shangguan Fenglan heard this and sighed inwardly. Then, she fell silent and quietly looked at Great Elder. Huff. After a long time, Great Elder let out a long breath. His expression suddenly became a little haggard. He waved his hand at Shangguan Fenglan and said, This matter is up to you. Yes. Shangguan Fenglan bowed and replied, then turned and left. Qin Batian, Lu Xingyang, the Great Elder also stood up and walked to the window. He looked at the night sky outside, and there was an indescribable sadness on his face. Early the next morning, Qin Feiyang, Mu Tianyang, and Hua Yi went to the resource hall early as usual. Not long after, Feng Yuan slowly walked down from the second floor with his hands behind his back. Greetings, Hall Master. Everyone in the resource hall, including Qin Feiyang and the other two, immediately bowed. Yes. Feng Yuan indifferently nodded and said, Jiang Haotian, Hua Yi, Mu Tianyang, come here. The three of them looked at each other and hurried to Feng Yuan's side. Feng Yuan took out a universe pouch and threw it to the three of them, saying, Go to the treasure pavilion immediately. No matter what, you have to bid for a 4 symbols infinite divine pellet. Mu Tianyang asked suspiciously, What do you want the 4 symbols infinite divine pellet for? Feng Yuan said, Don't worry about that. Go. Yes. Mu Tianyang nodded and put away the Chenkuan bag. Then he called out to Qin Feiyang and the other two, and walked outside. Mu Tianyang, this old man has already arranged people at the North Gate. Think of a way to bring them to the North Gate. When the time comes, you will help from the side. You must eliminate these 2 people. Just as the 3 of them stepped out of the door, Feng Yuan's voice suddenly sounded in Mu Tianyang's mind. Mu Tianyang was stunned. He did not turn around, nor did he stop. He replied in his mind, Understood. Regarding this, Qin Feiyang and Hua Yi did not notice. The 3 of them left the Nine Heavens Palace. When they reached the bottom of the sky stairway, Hua Yi took out a transmission altar and said, Are we going directly to the treasure pavilion? No. Go to the North Gate. Mu Tianyang transmitted his voice. Then, Qin Feiyang and Hua Yi looked at him in surprise. He was actually transmitting his voice? Mu Tianyang said in his mind, When we left the resource hall, Feng Yuan secretly told me that he has arranged people at the North Gate. What? That old bastard wants to make a move on us so soon? Hua Yi said angrily. You should feel honored. If it were someone else, would he be so meticulous? Mu Tianyang gloated. Hua Yi rolled his eyes at him and glanced at the white-haired old man beside the sky stairway. While reviving the altar, he transmitted his voice. Since he has set up an ambush at the North Gate, then we should avoid it. Why are we taking the initiative to send ourselves up? Of course it's to catch his weakness. Mu Tianyang laughed secretly. Weakness? Hua Yi was suspicious. Brother Mu means that since these people were arranged by Feng Yuan, As long as we capture them alive, Feng Yuan won't be able to defend himself. Qin Feiyong secretly said. So that's how it is. Hua Yi suddenly understood. At this time, the altar was revived. The three of them walked up one after another. The next moment, they descended on the plains outside the north gate. On the plains, there was already a sea of people. The city gate was also crowded. Without a doubt, these people were all here to participate in the auction. Hua Yi swept his gaze below and sighed with emotion. I've never seen such a scene before. This is good. The more people there are, the more the value of the four symbols infinite divine pill will be reflected. Mu Tianyang secretly laughed. Qin Feiyong nodded. He could already imagine that there would be a fierce battle in the auction house of the treasure pavilion today. However, this was not a problem he was concerned about. He scanned the crowd, looking for Feng Yuan's lackeys. These people must be lurking in the crowd. The people arranged by Feng Yuan are definitely not simple characters. With the strength of the three of us, can we stop them? Hua Yi transmitted his voice, a little worried. Don't worry. The moment we left the resource hall, I had already secretly informed Mu Qing, who was cultivating in the space divine object, to send a message to Shangguan Qiu and pass it on to Shangguan Fenglan. I think Shangguan Fenglan is already rushing towards Sky Dragon City. She might even be here. Mu Tianyang secretly thought, at the same time scanning the void. As the hall master of the law enforcement hall, Shangguan Fenglan must have a space divine object. And now, she might be hiding in the space divine object, monitoring everything here. You've already informed Lan Er? Hua Yi was stunned and smiled bitterly. It's been arranged without anyone knowing. You and Brother Jiang are indeed difficult to deal with. Mu Tianyang was about to be proud. But suddenly, his expression was slightly stunned, and he turned his head to stare at Hua Yi strangely. Qin Feiyong also looked at Hua Yi with an extremely strange expression. What's wrong? Hua Yi looked at the two of them suspiciously. Qin Feiyong said, If I didn't hear wrongly, you seem to have said the two words Lan just now? That's right. Is there a problem? Hua Yi nodded and asked puzzledly. Qin Feiyong and Mu Tianyang looked at each other and asked again, The Lana you're talking about, it can't be Shangguan Fenglan, right? Nonsense. Who else could it be if not her? Hua Yi rolled his eyes. Qin Feiyong and the other man's faces began to twitch. Lan Er? This form of address was too intimate. Qin Feiyong said, Isn't the speed of your development a little too fast? Hua Yi chuckled and said, Things like feelings, it must be fast. Awesome. Qin Feiyong and Hua Yi couldn't help but give a thumbs up. Not to mention other things, just this point alone, they couldn't even catch up. It was just that they didn't know if this form of address had been approved by Shangguan Fenglan? Or was it just Hua Yi's wishful thinking? All right, don't worry about these unimportant issues, let's go. Mu Tianyang shook his head and flew towards the North City Gate. Hua Yi hurriedly said, Wait, if Lana hasn't come yet, then wouldn't we be walking into a trap? We can't wait. If we wait any longer, those people arranged by Feng Yuan will probably see through the clues. If she really hasn't come, then we'll go to the Black Tortoise World. Mu Tianyang thought to himself. Black Tortoise World? Hua Yi was suspicious. Mu Tianyang was slightly taken aback and said, He still doesn't know about the Black Tortoise World? He's been there. But he doesn't know that it's the Black Tortoise World, nor does he know that it's an independent small world. He only thinks that it's a spatial divine object. Qin Feiyong thought to himself. So it's like that. Mu Tianyang muttered, and flew towards the North City Gate while saying, The Black Tortoise World is Brother Zhang's spatial divine object. Hua Yi nodded in realization, and followed beside Qin Feiyong. He scanned the sea of people below, and said, This Feng Yuan is also smart, choosing today to assassinate us. There are so many people today, it's easy to hide. Mu Tianyang smiled inwardly. It's indeed easy to hide. If you hadn't gained his trust, we wouldn't have thought that there's one of his lackeys among these people. Hua Yi thought to himself. Isn't that Jiang Haotian? And the number one on the Earth leaderboard, Mu Tianyang. They're actually here too. It seems that they're also very interested in the four symbols infinite divine pellet. Aren't you talking nonsense? They're all perfect war gods. If the four symbols infinite divine pellet is really useful, then they can directly step into the half-step divine sovereign realm. How can they not be moved by such kindness? Moreover, they don't lack soul stones. In the last battle with Xueqi, Mu Tianyang won a total of 50 million soul stones. Zhang Haotian and Hua won even more. Especially Zhang Haotian, not only did he win 300 billion soul stones from Jin Fatso, but he also won 100 million soul stones from Feng Zihan. He's a true tycoon. This time, he'll probably win for sure. Below. Some disciples of Nine Heavens Palace recognized Qin Feiyang and the other two and immediately began to discuss in low voices. So he's the Zhang Haotian that was framed by Feng Wenhai. He's indeed a dragon amongst men. His bearing is extraordinary. Although Zhang Haotian's name had long been famous in the northern region, many people came to Sky Dragon City for the first time and saw Qin Feiyang for the first time, so their eyes were filled with curiosity. Hua said, "Brother Zhang, even I'm a bit jealous of your fame. Take it if you like it." "I don't want it anyway." Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. "Is fame something that others can take away?" Hua was speechless. The three of them chatted and laughed, greeting the people below from time to time, but secretly, they were always vigilant. They were about 500 to 600 feet away from the city gate. Whoosh! Suddenly, four ordinary-looking middle-aged men in simple clothes soared into the sky from the crowd behind and flew towards the north city gate like lightning. Hua was startled and glanced at the four of them, sending a message. "Is it them?" "I don't know." Feng Yuan only said that he had people arranged, but he didn't say who they were. Mu Tianyang thought. "We can't be careless. These four people seem to be flying towards the north city gate, but they're in the same line as us. When they get close, they'll suddenly attack us from behind and we won't even have a chance to fight back." Qin Feiyang sent a message. "Yes." Hua and Mu Tianyang secretly responded and became more vigilant. Chapter 2091. The distance was getting closer and closer. The four middle-aged men only curiously sized up Qin Feiyang and the other two during the whole process. They looked harmless to humans and animals. If they didn't know beforehand, they definitely wouldn't have suspected them. The distance between the front and the back was only about 100 feet. For war gods and above, this distance was within reach. Whoosh! At this moment, the four men suddenly accelerated and went straight for Qin Feiyang and Hua Yi's backs. Their eyes were filled with killing intent. "It's really them." Qin Feiyang and the other two felt a chill in their hearts. At such a close distance, if they weren't prepared, they wouldn't be able to react at all. The people below were undoubtedly a good example. Although the four men had already revealed their killing intent, they were all in a state of ignorance. They were either whispering to each other or busy with their own things. In the blink of an eye, on the faces of the four men, a smile of success appeared. Because in their view, in the face of such a sudden sneak attack, even if the other party's reaction was extraordinary, it would be impossible for them to react. Death was a foregone conclusion. However, just when they were full of confidence and thought that they could succeed in one strike, Qin Feiyang grabbed Mu Tianyang and Hua Yi, used the walk character art, and swooped down, instantly appearing above the city gate. The four men were stunned. What was going on? It was as if they already knew that they would sneak attack. The people below also finally noticed the abnormality in the sky. "What's going on?" The people glanced at Qin Feiyang and the other two middle-aged men, their eyes full of surprise. "Who are you? Why did you sneak attack us?" Qin Feiyang stood above the city gate, gloomily staring at the four middle-aged men, and shouted in a stern voice. "Sneak attack? What's going on?" In an instant, the people on the plain were in an uproar. The four middle-aged men glanced at Qin Feiyang, turned around without hesitation, and flew away. "Who gave you the courage to hurt the people of Nine Heavens Palace?" Suddenly, a violent shout exploded out of thin air, like thunder, deafening. Following closely, a black-clothed young man appeared in the void and stood in front of the four people. "It's Senior Brother Madman." The disciples of Nine Heavens Palace below recognized the black-robed young man immediately. Their eyes were filled with reverence as though they had just seen their idol. "He's that famous lunatic? He's so lawless that he doesn't even put the heads of the Nine Heavens Palace in his eyes." What a powerful aura. He must be a terrifying existence that has already surpassed the level of a perfect divine lord. Everyone discussed animatedly, their faces filled with fear. However, Qin Feiyong and the other two had a hint of doubt in their eyes. Shouldn't Shangguan Fenglan be the one to help them? How did he become a lunatic? At the same time, the four middle-aged men hovered in the air as they looked at the madman before them. Their faces were filled with fear. Obviously, they all knew what madman was capable of. Madman glanced at the four of them and sneered. Do you want to die kneeling or lying down? The corners of Qin Feiyong and the other two's mouths twitched. Was there a difference? Lying down was death. Kneeling was death. Either way, they were going to die. When the four heard this, their pupils shrank. Swoosh! Immediately after, they quickly scattered and used teleportation to escape in 4 different directions. Mere 4 great success divine lords also wished to escape from in front of me? Madman's face was filled with disdain. Boom! The peerlessly terrifying pressure was like a torrent, surging towards the 4 people with an earth-shattering momentum. The 4 of them were immediately imprisoned in the air as though they were stuck in a quagmire. They couldn't move at all. This aura. His cultivation has indeed surpassed the Divine Lord realm. Someone below exclaimed. Surpassed the Divine Lord realm. Everyone gasped. Just how terrifying was Madman's strength? I'm asking you. How do you want to die? The madman waved his hand and directly grabbed the 4 of them from afar. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed tightly onto their necks, causing them to be unable to breathe. The 4's eyes were filled with despair. Not going to speak? Then according to my usual methods, I'll grant you death. Madman chuckled and slowly raised his arm. His 5 fingers bent like an eagle's claw as he aimed at one of them. Immediately, his 5 fingers slowly contracted. That person's body immediately began to deform. Streaks of red blood spurted out from the pores all over his body like a fountain. That scene was as if there were several invisible mountains crazily squeezing this person's body. That heart-wrenching pain caused his face to distort. Pain and helplessness. When the other 3 saw this scene, their faces turned ashen. Even the people below couldn't help but turn pale. He was going to crush that person's divine body. Ah! Finally! Accompanied by an ear-piercing scream, that person's body suddenly exploded in the air. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. To be able to crush a great divine lord so casually, this madman is really not ordinary terrifying. Mu Tianyang muttered. Yes. This person is worthy of being the number 1 on the heaven list. Xueqi couldn't help but feel his scalp go numb. With such strength, they could only look up to him. Shwa! Madman licked his lips as if killing people brought him pleasure. He then swept his gaze over the other 3. However, just by looking at Madman's eyes, the 3 of them felt as if they had fallen into hell. Their bodies turned cold. Madman looked at the 3 of them and smiled. How about this? Let's change the topic. Why did you want to harm Jiang Haotian and the others? Who is the mastermind behind this? Hearing this, the 3 of them looked even more terrified. Not going to speak? Wait until I bring you back to 9 Heaven Palace. I have 10,000 ways to make you speak. Madman chuckled and opened a teleportation altar. Senior brother Madman, I know them. Suddenly, a flattering voice sounded from the crowd below. And Madman and Qin Feiyong were taken aback. They looked down at the same time and saw a young man wearing 9 Heaven Palace's uniform rise up from the crowd. It's you? Qin Feiyong was surprised. This person was actually Ma Guang. Ma Guang smiled flatteringly. I didn't expect senior brother Jiang to still remember me. It's a great honor. We entered 9 Heaven Palace together and lived on the same Sword Peak. How could I forget you? Qin Feiyong smiled. Ma Guang was the person Chang Li had arranged to monitor him. However, Ma Guang was also a smart person and didn't listen to Cheng Li. Madman asked, You said you know them? Yes. Some time ago, I saw one of them in 9 Heaven Palace. It's him. Ma Guang pointed to the person on the left and said, Don't talk nonsense. That person's face changed as he hurriedly shouted, Shut up for me. Madman's eyes turned cold. He took a step forward and punched that person's mouth. Ah! That person suddenly screamed. His teeth were shattered and his mouth was smashed. Blood dripped out. Madman smiled contemptuously and looked down at Ma Guang. Continue, Ma Guang said. He is. However, before he could say anything, Ma Guang suddenly let out a painful scream. Immediately after, Ma Guang fell to the ground and his life force quickly disappeared. Qin Feiyang's face changed as he hurriedly flew towards Ma Guang. Don't go down. There are still Feng Yuan's lackeys hiding in the crowd. Hua Yi hurriedly grabbed Qin Feiyang and glanced at the crowd below as he transmitted his voice. Qin Feiyang's heart sank as he looked at Ma Guang. He was surprised to find that on the back of Ma Guang's head, there was a small bloody hole with blood flowing out. Obviously, someone had plotted against Ma Guang behind his back. But the problem was, with so many people present, why didn't anyone discover the person who plotted against Ma Guang? Even Madman didn't notice. Where was this person hiding? Madman was also a little stunned. He glanced at the crowd and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. He laughed and said, "It's getting more and more interesting." As soon as his voice faded, his divine sense surged out like a tidal wave, covering the entire plain. Everything was clear in his eyes. However, but he didn't find a suspicious person. He also didn't find any spatial divine objects. Wait. Suddenly, Qin Feiyang seemed to have thought of something as he hurriedly glanced at the other three people and shouted, "Senior brother Madman, quickly put them into the spatial divine object." However, before his voice faded, another three shrill screams rang out. He saw that the three people who were imprisoned in the void by Madman also had a bloody hole between their eyebrows, penetrating from the front to the back as blood gushed out. The divine soul in the sea of consciousness had already turned into ashes. It's still too late. Qin Feiyang was extremely angry as he scanned the void. Where was this person hiding? Then he looked at Madman. Looking at the three people who had died, his brows were twitching and his veins were popping out. Who was he? He was the famous Madman of the Nine Heavens Palace. He had always been the only one who killed in front of others, and no one dared to act rashly in front of him. And this time, Ma Guang and the other three were actually killed one after another. To him, this was a humiliation. Very good. Very good. Lao Zi is completely angry. All of a sudden, Madman laughed sinisterly as his divine power surged out like a waterfall, covering the sky and the sun as it surged out in all directions. In an instant, a giant divine barrier appeared. Not only did it cover the entire plain, it even spread to the entire sky above Sky Dragon City. Rumble! The barrier fell. Sky Dragon City, as well as the thousands of miles around Sky Dragon City, were all covered by the barrier. This place had become a huge cage. From now on, you are only allowed to enter and not allowed to leave. Whoever dares to cause trouble, die! Madman shouted. His voice was like a bell, resounding in all directions and clearly transmitted into everyone's ears. What's going on? Who set up this divine barrier? Not only the plains outside the 4 city gates, even the city itself had fallen into chaos. Qin Feiyang frowned as he flew in front of Madman and whispered, "Senior brother Madman, why don't we forget about it first?" Forget about it? How is that possible? If we don't find this person today, we won't give up. Madman smiled coldly. Hua Yi and Mu Tianyang also flew over. Hua Yi thought, although Ma Guang was killed, from what he said at the beginning, it's not hard to deduce the origin of these 4 people. That's right. Ma Guang said that some time ago, he had seen one of them in the Nine Heavens Palace. That's enough to prove that these 4 people are from our Nine Heavens Palace. After all, outsiders are unable to enter the Nine Heavens Palace. Qin Feiyang nodded. Chapter 2092. So what if we know their background and identity? If we don't know who's behind it, it's useless. Madman snorted. Qin Feiyang sighed. They've already been silenced, how can we investigate? Yeah. There are so many people in Sky Dragon City. Especially today, there's a sea of people inside and outside the city. Even if he shows up now, we won't be able to find him. Rather than wasting time, it's better to give up and find another chance in the future. Moreover, Today is an important day for the Treasure Pavilion to auction the 4 Symbols Infinite Divine Pill. If we continue like this, we'll be smashing their place. Xueqi smiled. Madman raised his eyebrows as he looked at the 3 and asked, "Why did you come to Sky Dragon City?" "Naturally for the 4 Symbols Infinite Divine Pill." Qin Feiyong smiled and said, "Senior brother, why have you appeared here?" "We also wanted to see the 4 Symbols Infinite Divine Pill. But we didn't expect to encounter such a thing before we even entered the city. It's really annoying." "But you're right, we won't be able to find him if we search now." Madman sighed helplessly. With a wave of his hand, the divine power barrier covering Sky Dragon City quickly dissipated. Qin Feiyong and the other 2 looked at each other and said, "Senior brother Madman, since we're all going to the Treasure Pavilion, why don't we go together?" "Together?" Madman was slightly taken aback and sneered, "You want me to be a free bodyguard, right?" The 3 laughed embarrassedly. Madman rolled his eyes and waved his sleeves. "Don't waste time, let's go." "Okay." The 3 nodded and quickly followed behind Madman towards the city gate. "Right." Madman suddenly turned around and looked at the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace behind him. "Take the corpses of Ma Guang and the others to the enforcement hall and let Shangguan Fenglan investigate their identities." "Yes." The disciples respectfully replied and took the corpses of Ma Guang and the others, opening an altar and quickly leaving. Qin Feiyong and the other 3 also entered the city. Everywhere they went, people would make way for them. The guards guarding the city didn't even dare to ask anything and directly let them pass. A moment later, the 4 of them arrived at the entrance of the Treasure Pavilion without any hindrance. A staff member stepped forward and asked, "Do the 4 of you have an appointment?" "An appointment?" Madman raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's an appointment?" The staff member looked at the 4 of them and said, "I'm sorry, but you don't have an appointment today, so you can't enter." Qin Feiyong and the other 2 were dumbfounded. This person actually dared to reject a madman? "Can't enter?" Madman smiled playfully and looked at the staff member. "What did you say? Say it again?" "This." Looking at the overbearing lunatic, the staff member was a little flustered. "What are you doing? Get out of the way." Suddenly, another staff member quickly ran over and scolded the staff member. She was a young woman in her 20s. The staff felt wronged and said, "They didn't make an appointment." The young woman scolded, "Who are they? Do I even need to make an appointment? Hurry up and get out of the way. Otherwise our Treasure Pavilion won't be able to open for business today." The staff member's expression changed as he looked at Qin Feiyong and the other 3 in surprise. They actually had such a big background? Then he quickly retreated to the side. The young woman looked at Qin Feiyong and the other 3 and smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, the 4 of you. He's new here and doesn't know your names. Please forgive him for offending you." "It's fine." Qin Feiyong waved his hand. "Young Master Zhang is really reasonable. The steward has already expected young Master Zhang to come, so he has already arranged a VIP room in advance. The 4 of you, please come in." The young woman smiled flatteringly. Madman glanced at the staff member and swaggered in. Qin Feiyong and the other 2 followed closely behind. The young woman looked at the backs of Qin Feiyong and the other 3 and walked to the front of the staff member. She whispered, "The people here today are basically all big shots of the northern region. Even if they don't have an appointment, you have to be polite, understand?" "Okay." The staff member nodded. Auction house. The young woman led Qin Feiyong and the other 3 into VIP room number 1. Although there was still a long time before the auction began, the outside was already filled with people. There were even quite a few people standing behind. It was very noisy. Every one of them exuded an extraordinary aura. They were either extremely wealthy people or the patriarch of a prestigious family. In short, those who could enter the auction house today were basically rich and respectable existences. Qin Feiyong glanced at the auction house and waved his hand. "You can leave. Don't disturb us if there's nothing important." "Yes." The young woman respectfully replied and turned to walk out of the VIP room and close the door. Qin Feiyong looked at Madman and smiled. "Senior brother, I'm afraid you didn't come to Sky Dragon City today for the 4 Symbols Infinite Divine Pill." Madman sprawled on the chair and said disdainfully, "What 4 Symbols Infinite Divine Pill? I'm not interested." "As expected," Qin Feiyong muttered. Not long ago, I was sleeping soundly in the duty hall, but that woman Shangguan Fenglan suddenly sent me a message, saying that you might be in trouble and asked me to help you. Originally I wasn't willing, but she said that it was the Great Elder's orders, so I had no choice but to come and take a look. I didn't expect you to really be in trouble. I'm puzzled. Why is it that no matter where you go, there are people who want to plot against you? Madman looked at Qin Feiyong with an extremely strange expression. Qin Feiyong rubbed his nose and said with a smile, "Maybe it's because I have good relationships with people." Good relationships with people? Madman's eyes were filled with disdain. Qin Feiyong said, "Did Shangguan Fenglan say anything else to you?" Anything else? Madman was stunned and joked. Then what do you think she will tell me? This? Qin Feiyong hesitated for a moment and sighed. To tell you the truth, the people who came to assassinate us this time were sent by Feng Yuan. Madman even knew his true identity, so it didn't seem to matter if he told him this. Feng Yuan. Madman was stunned for a moment, then nodded in realization. He looked at Qin Feiyong and the other two and said, "So you already knew?" This is all thanks to Mu Tianyang. He is now undercover by Feng Yuan's side. No matter what Feng Yuan does, we will know immediately. Qin Feiyong said. Madman glanced at Mu Tianyang and said, "So, this time you wanted to capture those 4 people alive and then overthrow Feng Yuan?" "That's right." Unfortunately, they were silenced. Qin Feiyong shook his head regretfully. "Naive." Madman sneered. "Naive?" Qin Feiyong and the other two looked at each other and looked at Madman suspiciously. Even if you capture them alive, they won't pose any threat to Feng Yuan. Because Feng Yuan himself didn't appear from the beginning to the end. He can completely deny it. Unless there is direct evidence. Madman said. When Qin Feiyong and the other two heard this, they lowered their heads and pondered for a moment. It seemed to make sense. Madman's gaze turned and landed on Mu Tianyang, saying, "Aren't you undercover by Feng Yuan's side?" Mu Tianyang nodded. "Isn't that easy? Go directly to him and get him to say that these people were sent by him. Take the opportunity to record it. Isn't this video irrefutable evidence? At that time, even if he has 100 mouths, he won't be able to deny it." Madman said lightly. "Yes." Mu Tianyang's eyes lit up. "Of course. Just this small matter is not enough to bring him down. After all, his status is too high. As long as he takes the initiative to admit his mistake in front of the First Elder, the First Elder will definitely not pursue it. At most, the First Elder will just scold him a little. So, you still need to plan carefully." Madman said. Qin Feiyong and the other two cupped their hands and said, "Thank you for your advice, senior brother." "Did I say anything?" "I don't think so." Madman frowned. The 3 of them were stunned for a moment, but soon understood. They nodded and smiled. Understood, senior brother, you didn't say anything." "Haha." Madman laughed loudly and his brows loosened. The sun was high in the sky. A woman in white finally appeared on the auction stage. It was Shangguan Qiu. She wore a long white dress that was spotless. Her black hair was like a waterfall, soft and beautiful. Her whole person was radiant and full of energy. With the arrival of Shangguan Qiu, the originally noisy auction house quieted down. Because they knew that the thing they were looking forward to was about to appear. "Thank you for coming to the Treasure Pavilion today, and for trusting us all this time. Here, on behalf of everyone in the Treasure Pavilion, I sincerely thank you." Shangguan Qiu finished her opening speech in a few words, and then bowed deeply to everyone. "I won't say any more polite words, because I believe that no one wants to hear it now. Then, I'll go straight to the main topic today. Everyone present already has some understanding of the situation regarding the 4 symbols infinite divine pill. I believe that many of you are now wondering if such a pill really exists in the world. Now, I'll tell you that it does exist. And I guarantee on the reputation of the Treasure Pavilion that if this pill is fake, not only will we return the soul stones, we will also compensate you 10 times the amount." Shangguan Qiu smiled. 10 times the amount? Then it must be real. Miss Shangguan, we still trust the reputation of the Treasure Pavilion. Let's get started. Someone began to urge them. "Thank you again for your trust. Today, The treasure pavilion will auction a total of 10 four symbols infinite divine pills. And we don't know when the next auction will be held, so please cherish this opportunity. First, the first pill. Shangguan Qiu took out a jade box and gently opened it. An elixir floated out of the jade box. The 9 elixir veins on it were as dazzling as the stars. That's the four symbols infinite divine pill? It's actually 9 elixir veins. Which alchemy master made this? At this moment, everyone's eyes were attracted by the four symbols infinite divine pill floating in front of Shangguan Qiu. Some were surprised, some were shocked, and some were excited. Chapter 2093. I definitely know which Grandmaster the four symbols infinite divine pellet came from. Shangguan Qiu smiled. Then tell us. Let us know who this great man is. The crowd shouted. These two masters are really great. Because the 9 Chu yellow dragon pill, the 9 turn dragon blood pill, and the four symbols infinite divine pill were all made by them. Furthermore, they were the ones who worked tirelessly and spent countless years researching it. Shangguan Qiu said. What? They researched and developed them. The crowd could not believe their ears. They had thought that some alchemy masters were lucky enough to get the prescriptions of these elixirs from some ancient site. They had never expected that they had researched and developed them independently. In other words, they had created 3 new elixir prescriptions. Such a shocking move could be said to be unprecedented in the past and never to be repeated in the future. They were more and more curious about the 2 masters that Shangguan Qiu had mentioned. Who were they? How could they have such terrifying wisdom? Shangguan Qiu scanned the crowd and said with a smile, These 2 masters are. Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang frowned as they looked at Shangguan Qiu, who was beaming with joy. Hua Yi glanced at Qin Feiyang and Madame, then looked up at Shangguan Qiu and frowned as well. Frenzy was curious. The people in the other VIP rooms and the crowd outside also held their breaths as they stared at Shangguan Qiu. After a long while, Shangguan Qiu suddenly smiled and shook his head. I'm sorry, everyone. This is a secret. I can't reveal it. Hearing this, the crowd could not help but curse. If it's a secret, why are you acting like you're going to reveal it? You're obviously making a fool of us. Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang secretly heaved a sigh of relief. If Shangguan Qiu really revealed it, there would be more trouble in the future. Actually, I also want to tell you, but the 2 masters kept a low profile. They told us not to reveal their identities. So, everyone, please don't ask around. Now, I announce the start of the auction. The starting price is 1 million soul stones. There's no upper limit. Shangguan Qiu shouted. However, as soon as Shangguan Qiu finished speaking, the whole place fell into a dead silence. The frenzied scramble that Shangguan Qiu had expected did not happen. Everyone was silent. What's the situation? Even Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang were confused, let alone Shangguan Qiu. Was the price too high? The low price was indeed too high. Although the people present were all extremely wealthy and noble, one must know that this was not 1 million divine crystals. Instead, it was 1 million soul stones. Who would be willing to take out 1 million soul stones at once? Furthermore, 1 million soul stones was only the lowest price. It would definitely be better later on. Everyone, what's wrong with you? This 4 symbols everlasting godly pill is enough to allow any divine battle god to break through to the next level, saving a lot of time. Time is precious. I don't need to say it. Everyone knows that no amount of money can buy it. Especially the perfect war gods among you. I don't know if you have calculated how many years it will take for a divine battle god to reach the half-step divine emperor realm? Even if you have 100 million soul stones, no matter how fast you refine them, you will still need close to 2,000 years to refine all of them. 2,000 years. How long is that? As long as you have a 4 symbols everlasting godly pill, it will only take a moment. Now, think about it again. Which is more important, the soul stones or the 4 symbols everlasting godly pill? Shangguan Qiu did not panic because of this. Instead, he persuaded them emotionally and logically. After hearing this, everyone present nodded. Indeed. In terms of time, the 4 symbols everlasting godly pill was more important than the soul stones. Mu Tianyang smiled and said, Let's take the lead. Don't. Don't. Xueqi quickly waved his hand. What's wrong? Mu Tianyang was suspicious. Xueqi smiled bitterly and said, didn't you hear about what happened last time? When Brother Zhang spoke, no one dared to compete. Mu Tianyang was slightly stunned and could not help but smile bitterly. The corner of Qin Feiyang's mouth twitched fiercely. How long ago was it? How could he still remember? Madman looked at the three of them and suddenly said, I bid 10 million. Ah! Qin Feiyang and the other two looked at Madman in astonishment. What? You have a problem? Madman glanced at the three of them. No, no, no. We just want to say that if you speak, no one will dare to raise the price. After all, who would dare to compete with you? Besides, if you raise the price to 10 million, who can bear it? Qin Feiyang said bitterly. Is this wrong? I want to deter them, lest they bid too high and let the treasure pavilion benefit. Wait. Why do I feel that something is wrong? Looking at you, why do you look like you can't wait to bid a sky-high price? Madman frowned. No, no. Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang quickly waved their hands. Of course, they wanted the price to be as high as possible, because they could get half of the soul stones. For example, if the price was 100 million, they could get 50 million. However, Madman did not know that the four symbols infinite divine pill was refined by them. They did not want Madman to know, because they could not control Madman. It would not be good if word got out. Then what are you guys talking about? Madman rolled his eyes at Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang and then looked at the auction house. The auction house was still dead silent, because many people recognized Madman's voice. Especially the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace, their fear of Madman was deeply rooted. Who would dare to make a move? However, the others, such as those who did not belong to Nine Heavens Palace, were somewhat restless. 11 million. Suddenly, someone in the auction house shouted, 12 million. 13 million. 14 million. It was like poking a hornet's nest. It was out of control. In the face of such temptation, Madman's deterrence seemed to be useless. The voices of bidding were like waves, wave after wave, echoing in the auction house. After a while, the price of the four symbols infinite divine pill was raised to a sky-high price of 50 million. It did not stop. The competition was still going on. We've made a fortune, we've made a fortune. Mu Tianyang sat on the chair, unable to hide the excitement in his heart. Even if it was only 50 million soul stones, he and Qin Feiyang could get 25 million soul stones. If they divided it equally, each of them could get 5 million soul stones. This was even faster than killing people and robbing them. Shangguan Qiu, who was on the high platform, was also full of smiles. This intense scene had far exceeded her expectations. Too slow, 90 million. Suddenly, an impatient voice sounded from VIP room number 6. 90 million. The people outside the auction house could not help but gasp. Who was this? He was so rich, increasing the price by 20 to 30 million. Qin Feiyang, Mu Tianyang, and Xueqi also looked at VIP room number 6 in surprise. But because of the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could not see the people inside. However, when they looked at Madman, they found that he was also looking at VIP room number 6, frowning slightly. Qin Feiyang asked, Senior brother, do you know who he is? The second on the heaven list, Yu Zijia. But in addition to the second on the heaven list, he has another title, the recognized number 1 alchemist in the Nine Heavens Palace. Madman said. Yu Zijia. Qin Feiyang murmured. I've heard of this name. It is said that this person has been talented since he was young, and he seems to be the last disciple of a big shot? Xueqi said. That's right. His master is the second elder of our Nine Heavens Palace. Madman said. It's actually the second elder. Xueqi's eyes trembled. Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang were also shocked. The second elder was an existence second only to the great elder in the entire Nine Heavens Palace. To be able to be valued by the second elder and accepted as a disciple, how could he be an ordinary character? He is ranked second on the heaven list, so his cultivation must have reached the perfect divine lord realm. This four symbols infinite divine pill is useless to him. So why did he come here to join in the fun? Xueqi raised his eyebrows. Is there even a need to say it? As an alchemist, encountering such a novel pill, he will definitely want to take it back and study it. Qin Feiyang said. If he wants it, he has to get my permission. Madman coldly snorted and said, I bid 100 million soul stones. No more, no less. Just enough to raise the price by 1. Madman, what do you mean? Yu Zijie's voice immediately came out, bringing with it an extremely unhappy tone. If it was an increase of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions, it meant that Madman was determined to win. However, by increasing the price by 1, it was obvious that he was deliberately going against him. Nothing. It's just fun. Madman said indifferently. Yu Zijie said angrily, I don't think I have offended you before. Is there a need for you to do this? Yes. You haven't offended me. But your previous tone made me very unhappy. What's too slow? Are you very arrogant? I really don't know who gave you the courage to be arrogant in front of me. Madman's face was full of contempt. Fine, I won't fight with you. Do as you wish. Yu Zijie was angry, but he didn't have any temper. As a disciple of the Heaven List, how could he not know Madman's temper? If he really went all out, there would be no end to it. At least you know your place. Madman smiled proudly. Humph. But another cold snort sounded, followed by a cold voice in the auction house. Besides bullying others, what else can you do? 200 million. Feng Zihan. Qin Feiyang and the other two looked at each other. They were all too familiar with this voice. It was the number 1 on the Heaven List. Feng Zihan. This 4 symbols infinite divine pill actually alarmed 2 disciples of the Heaven List? Moreover, listening to Feng Zihan's tone, it seemed that he was prepared to fight Madman to the end. This stinking woman is here too? Madman frowned. Mu Tianyang's eyes flashed and said, Senior brother Madman, as a man, you can't lose to a woman. At the same time, he poked Qin Feiyang's back from behind. Qin Feiyang understood and nodded. Yes, yes, especially with so many people watching. If you admit defeat, how embarrassing would that be? A good man doesn't fight with a woman. Is there a need? Madman looked at the two of them and said. This, Qin Feiyang and Madman looked at each other. This guy was actually scared. Madman, aren't you capable? Continue. But at this time, Yu Zijie's laughter rang out, his words full of schadenfreude. Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang laughed. This Yu Zijie was really a godly assistant. As expected. Upon hearing Yu Zijie's words, Madman immediately stood up and said angrily, You want to see what I can do? Fine, I'll fulfill your wish, stinking woman, don't say that I bullied you, get lost as soon as possible. 300 million. 400 million. Feng Zihan said without hesitation, his tone becoming colder and colder. Chapter 2094. Bitch, why are you so stubborn? Frenzy was a little angry. Wasn't this a cheap treasure? 500 million. Frenzy shouted. In front of a woman, a man can't admit defeat. He didn't know if other people thought this way, but Madman thought this way. 600 million. Feng Zihan's cold voice came out. This is crazy. The two of them are using the soul stones like divine crystals. The Heaven List disciples of 9 Heaven Palace are really rich. Everyone's heart trembled. 500 to 600 million soul stones. Many people can't earn that much in their lifetime. But these two people didn't even blink their eyebrows in anger. To put it nicely, they were rich. To put it bluntly, they were prodigal. Shangguan Qiu was naturally excited. As a businessman, he liked to see such a scene the most. Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyang were also very excited. Because the higher Frenzy and Feng Zihan bid, the more soul stones they would get. But in front of Frenzy, they didn't dare to show it. They could only suppress the excitement in their hearts. Brother Jiang, Brother Mu, let's talk. Suddenly, Hua Yi's voice sounded in the minds of Qin Feiyang and Frenzy. Talk about what? The two were taken aback and looked at him in confusion. Shangguan Fenglan also told me a little about your cooperation with Shangguan Qiu. Hua Yi laughed secretly. Qin Feiyang had a bad premonition in his heart and said, If you have something to say, say it. Hua Yi secretly said, What I want to say is that you two can't be the only ones reaping the benefits. You, Qin Feiyang and Mu Tianyong suddenly had a trace of anger in their eyes. This guy was obviously trying to extort them. I don't want much. Each of you give me 50 million soul stones. Consider it as hush money. Xueqi laughed. 50 million isn't much? Qin Feiyang and Frenzy were furious. Xueqi's meaning was very obvious. If they didn't agree, he would tell Frenzy about them refining the four symbols infinite divine pill. Don't look at me so bitterly. We're friends and brothers. We'll go through thick and thin together, right? You've earned such a large sum of soul stones. You can't leave me with nothing, right? Xueqi secretly chuckled. Qin Feiyang said angrily, if we were really friends and brothers, you wouldn't have threatened us like this. How is this a threat? It's a discussion. Xueqi said, feeling wronged. Scram. Qin Feiyang glared at him and inwardly said, fine, I'll give you 50 million, but you better keep your mouth shut. Of course. Xueqi repeatedly agreed, his heart blooming with joy. He hadn't done anything, yet he had received 100 million soul stones. This was like a pie falling from the sky. He was dizzy from the smashing. As the three of them conversed, the price had already soared to 900 million. In the entire auction house, only the madman and Feng Zihan were increasing the price. Everyone else was watching with their mouths agape. 1 billion. Finally. The price broke through the 1 billion mark. And the one who bid 1 billion was Feng Zihan. When she bid, she didn't hesitate at all. It was as if this 1 billion soul stones were nothing in her eyes. The entire audience was dead silent. 1 billion divine crystals was still acceptable, but 1 billion soul stones, even some of the rich people present were unable to compare. The madman also fell silent. It wasn't that he couldn't afford this price, but he really didn't want to benefit the treasure pavilion. When the sandpiper and the clam fought, the fisherman would benefit. He and Feng Zihan fought desperately, letting the treasure pavilion reap all the benefits. This deal wasn't worth it. But if he backed down now, he would definitely be ridiculed. What should he do? Now, he was riding a tiger and couldn't get off. Qin Feiyang glanced at the madman, his eyes flashing slightly. He swept his gaze across the auction house and sighed. Senior brother madman, as the saying goes, a good man doesn't fight with a woman. Why are you sulking with a woman? Moreover, even if you win against senior sister Feng Zihan today, I'm afraid you'll become the subject of ridicule. They'll say that you, a grown man, don't even have this bit of magnanimity to bully a woman. Qin Feiyang's voice was very loud, spreading throughout the entire auction house. What are you doing? So you're not giving the madman a way out? Mu Tianyong secretly asked. Qin Feiyang secretly said, I'm giving him a way out. Why? Don't want to earn soul stones? Are you crazy? Mu Tianyong was a little angry. Who doesn't want to earn soul stones? But you also need to know how to be satisfied. You know the madman's temper. In the future, when he finds out that the four symbols infinite divine pill was refined by us, he will definitely not let it go. So we can't go too far. Know when to stop. Qin Feiyang secretly said. Mu Tianyong frowned. Although he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, he couldn't deny that Qin Feiyang's consideration wasn't unreasonable. As expected. Hearing Qin Feiyang's words, the madman immediately cast a grateful look at Qin Feiyang, then looked at the auction house and said righteously, That's right, I'm a grown man, how can I bully a woman? I admit defeat. As soon as these words came out, it attracted the praise of many people. You also need to have the ability to bully me. But suddenly, Feng Zihan's voice suddenly sounded. The madman raised his eyebrows, and anger immediately rose from his heart. Qin Feiyang hurriedly comforted him in a low voice. Senior brother, bear with it, don't argue with her. The madman took a deep breath and said, I'm a man, it's only right for me to give in to you women. I don't need you to give in. Feng Zihan immediately said mercilessly. This damned woman, why is she so insensible? The madman couldn't help but be angry. Qin Feiyang laughed. Senior sister, senior brother has already admitted defeat, why are you still being so aggressive? Feng Zihan said indifferently. Do you have the right to speak? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Was this woman crazy? She would bite whoever she saw? Fine. He was meddling in other people's business. You guys continue. Shangguan Qiu looked meaningfully at the VIP room where Qin Feiyang and the others were and asked loudly. 1 billion spirit stones. Is there anyone else who wants to bid? The people present all cast disdainful looks at Shangguan Qiu. With such a high price, who would dare to bid? You should be content. Shangguan Qiu was also quite embarrassed. She coughed dryly and smiled. Then I will announce the result. The first 4 symbols infinite divine pill is won by Feng Zihan. Next, the second pill will be auctioned. The starting price is still 1 million, and there is no upper limit. A new round of competition had begun. But this time, the madman and Feng Zihan didn't bid again. But Yu Zijie became very active. But in terms of words, he seemed to be extra careful, for fear of making the madman unhappy again. 1 billion spirit stones with Shangguan Qiu. Each of us will get 250 million spirit stones. Minus Hua Yi's 50 million spirit stones. Damn, just the first 4 symbols infinite divine pill alone, we will get 200 million spirit stones. Qin Feiyang, I warn you, don't give the pill formula to the first elder. Mu Tianyang silently calculated, and when the final result came out, he was so excited that he was incoherent. Am I the kind of person who will cut off his own path to wealth? Qin Feiyang was speechless. Then who knows? I am not a roundworm in your stomach. How would I know what you are thinking? Mu Tianyang secretly said. Qin Feiyang shook his head helplessly. The madman looked for a while, then stood up and said, Zhang Haotian, accompany me to a place. Qin Feiyang was stunned. He raised his head and looked at the madman suspiciously. Mu Tianyang and Hua Yi were also puzzled. The madman's eyes flashed, and he whispered, Actually, Shangguan Fenglan gave me a mission this time. There is another mission? Qin Feiyang and the other 2 looked at each other and asked doubtfully, What mission? A secret. The madman smiled mysteriously. Just the 2 of us? Qin Feiyang asked. Yes. The madman nodded. What about them? Qin Feiyang pointed at Mu Tianyang and Hua Yi. The madman said angrily, They are already so old, do they still need you to take care of them? You are not their father. Qin Feiyang's mouth twitched, and he said with a smile, I want to, but they won't admit it. Zhang Haotian, you are too much. Mu Tianyang and Hua Yi immediately glared at Qin Feiyang. Let's not talk about Hua Yi. Let's talk about Mu Tianyang. Mu Tianyang and Qin Batian were people of the same generation. Therefore, in terms of seniority, Qin Feiyang was considered a grandchild in front of Mu Tianyang. He actually wanted to be his father? Uncle can tolerate it, but aunt can't. Don't be long-winded, hurry up. The madman said and took out a teleportation altar. Wait. We came to the treasure pavilion under Feng Yuan's orders. Now that I am going out with you, does that count as leaving my post? Qin Feiyang said. The madman said disdainfully, With this old man here, what can he do to you? This. Qin Feiyang was a little hesitant. Now that he was working in the resource hall, he couldn't make any mistakes. Otherwise, he would be caught by Feng Yuan. With Feng Yuan's means, even if it was just a small mistake, he could cause a lot of trouble for you, let alone a big mistake. Why are you so wishy-washy? Although this mission was given to me by Shangguan Fenglan, the person behind it is the Great Elder. What can Feng Yuan do to you? The madman said angrily. So it's the Great Elder. Then I am relieved. Qin Feiyang nodded and looked at Mu Tianyang and Hua Yi with a smile. The mission given to us by Feng Yuan, you guys do as you see fit. Understood. I also want to experience this Yu Zijie's means. Mu Tianyang smiled playfully. Qin Feiyang glanced at the VIP room where Yu Zijie was. His eyes flashed and he exhorted, Don't go too far. After all, he is the second elder's disciple. Do I need you to remind me? Get lost, get lost. Mu Tianyang waved his hand impatiently. Qin Feiyang turned to look at the madman and said with a smile, Let's go. The madman's resurrection altar. The 2 jumped up one after another and then disappeared from the sight of Hua Yi and Mu Tianyang. Hua Yi asked suspiciously, Brother Mu, this madman is so mysterious. What is his mission? How would I know? Aren't you very familiar with Shangguan Fenglan? Why don't you ask her? Mu Tianyang said. Hua Yi's body stiffened and he smiled. Forget it, let's play with Yu Zijia. Anyway, the soul stones were given to us by Feng Yuan. It doesn't matter how much we waste. No temper. Mu Tianyang looked at Hua Yi with disdain and then swept his gaze to the auction house. Although it was not as intense as before, the price of the second four symbols infinite divine pill had soared to 100 million. There were very few people bidding. Because they did not want to offend Yu Zijia. In the end, the price stopped at 150 million. No one competed with Yu Zijia. Just when Yu Zijia thought that this four symbols infinite divine pill was already in the bag. 200 million. But suddenly, Mu Tianyang opened his mouth. As he said before, the soul stones were given to them by Feng Yuan. He did not care about wasting them and increased the price by 50 million. Yu Zijia's face changed on the spot. The atmosphere of the auction house also changed. Everyone's expression was extremely strange. What was going on with the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace? Why did they all like internal strife so much? Chapter 2095. Let's talk about Qin Feiyang and Madman. At this moment, the two of them arrived above a mountain. Qin Feiyang was very unfamiliar with this place and couldn't find the direction at all. There was no one below either. Ancient trees towered into the sky and beasts were everywhere. But the cultivation of these beasts wasn't strong. Most of them were at the initial and perfect war god level. It was very difficult to find a perfect war god level beast. What is this place? Qin Feiyang looked around and looked suspiciously at Madman. We haven't arrived yet. Madman opened another altar. Qin Feiyang jumped up with a stomach full of doubts. The next moment, they appeared in the sky above a vast desert. The wind whistled, yellow sand flew all over the sky, and the temperature was extremely hot. Madman didn't say anything and activated another legendary altar. We haven't arrived yet? Qin Feiyang was stunned. How far was Madman going to go? Next. The bewilderment in Qin Feiyang's heart grew stronger. Madman continued to activate altars and had activated more than a dozen altars. But looking at Madman's expression, it seemed that they hadn't reached their destination yet. Senior brother, where exactly are we going? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. He remembered that he had activated more than a dozen altars from the land of the undead to Sky Dragon City. Could it be that Madman was going to a place even further than the land of the undead? After activating a few more altars, the two of them arrived above a river. The river was more than a dozen meters wide and the rolling water made a deafening sound. And dozens of miles away from the river bank, there were more than a dozen villages of various sizes scattered. Qin Feiyang glanced around and judged the overall strength of those villages. The strongest person was a war saint. The weakest ones were even warriors and martial masters. Compared to Heavenly Dragon City, the spiritual energy of the world was worlds apart. Obviously. This place was located in a remote place in the northern region. Madman didn't activate any more altars here. Qin Feiyang looked at him suspiciously and said, "Is this the destination?" "No." Madman shook his head. "Not yet." Qin Feiyang was stunned. "But it's not far," Madman said again as he looked to the west, his eyes flickering. Qin Feiyang also looked over. But in the west, other than the rolling winding mountains and rivers, there was nothing special. The madman suddenly withdrew his gaze and took out two sets of black clothes from his cosmos ring. He threw one of them to Qin Feiyang. "What?" Qin Feiyang grabbed his clothes and asked suspiciously. "Change into it," Madman said as he took off the clothes with the flame pattern engraved on them and put on the black clothes. Qin Feiyang looked at Madman in astonishment. Not only were those clothes made of sackcloth, but they were also very shabby and dirty. They resembled the clothes worn by beggars. He lowered his head and carefully looked at the clothes Lunatic gave him. They were also tattered and dirty. He placed it at the tip of his nose and sniffed it. There was even a faint sour smell. "Hurry up," Madman urged. "Okay." Qin Feiyang nodded and quickly took off his coat and changed into his clothes. Madman said, "Put away your cosmos ring too." Qin Feiyang quickly took off his cosmos ring and put it in his arms. Madman also took off his cosmos ring, then held his head with both hands and rubbed it hard. His neat long hair was immediately messed up. How is it? Madman looked at Qin Feiyong and asked. Qin Feiyong looked at Madman for a moment and said, You have the temperament of a beggar. Heh. Madman grinned and raised his hands again. Without asking for Qin Feiyong's opinion, he directly made Qin Feiyong's long hair look like a chicken's nest. Senior brother, what do you want to do? Qin Feiyong was extremely depressed. Don't talk nonsense. Just follow me. After Madman finished speaking, he stepped out and landed on the bank of the river. Then he walked towards the village dozens of miles away. Qin Feiyong followed beside him and scanned the surroundings. There were also many fierce beasts in the surrounding forest, but their cultivation was the same as the people in the village. The strongest was only a battle saint. After a while, a village in front of them entered their sight. There were a total of 500 to 600 families in the village. There was a stream at the entrance of the village, and a dozen children were playing happily by the stream. Their ages ranged from 7 or 8 to 12 or 13, and their faces were filled with innocent smiles. Madman stood on a small hill and looked at the children from afar. He couldn't help but smile. Qin Feiyong on the side also missed this happy and worry-free life. Senior brother, this isn't your home, right? Qin Feiyong asked. My home? Madman was slightly stunned and speechless. What are you thinking? This place has nothing to do with me. I just thought of my childhood when I saw those kids. I see. Then can you tell me what we are doing here? Qin Feiyong said. Don't worry. Madman waved his hand and said, Suppress your cultivation for me. Don't scare those children. Qin Feiyong was helpless. What was this person trying to do? The two suppressed their cultivation to the Battle Emperor level before walking towards the village. Look, there are two beggars. One of the children suddenly noticed Qin Feiyong and Madman and immediately shouted to his companions. The group of children immediately looked at Qin Feiyong and Madman. The oldest of them was about 13 years old. He looked at Qin Feiyong and Madman, and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. He whispered, Everyone be careful. What? What are two beggars afraid of? The two children around 7 or 8 years old said. Idiot. There are even battle saint level beasts in the forest ahead. They can pass through the forest alive and come to our village. How can they be beggars? The older boy said angrily and gently knocked on the heads of the two children. After all, with their age, they naturally knew more things than other children. It seems to make sense. The other children pondered for a while and nodded. Then they all became vigilant. Don't be afraid, uncle. We are just passing by. Madman walked over and looked at the children, revealing a smile that he thought was very amiable. Passing by? The group of children was stunned. Yes, passing by. Madman nodded. One of the children pinched his nose and asked, Then where did you come from? Why are you so dirty? Even the disciples of the Heaven List are afraid of him, but now he is being despised by a few children. Qin Feiyong laughed secretly. Madman stared at Qin Feiyong and looked at the children, saying, We came from a village hundreds of miles away and have been in the mountains for several months. How can we not be dirty? Then what are you doing in the mountains? The group of children looked at him curiously. Madman smiled. Of course we are exploring and looking for treasures. Did you find any treasures? The group of children asked again. Madman laughed. There are some, but they are just ordinary herbs and can't be sold for much. I see. Then it must have been hard on you. Why don't you all wash up here and drink some water before you leave? Children were all innocent and naive. As long as one was not born with evil, it was easy to gain their trust. Can I? Madman glanced at the stream and asked. Of course. The children nodded. You little guys are really lovable. Madman said and wanted to reach out and touch the head of a child. But the older boy suddenly raised his arm and slapped Madman's hand away, saying, Wash up and leave. This little guy is quite vigilant. Qin Feiyong muttered and looked at the boy. The boy was about 1.5 meters tall and handsome. Compared to the other children, he had the maturity of an adult. Wait. Suddenly, his pupils shrank. This boy's cultivation was actually a 3-star combat emperor. This must be a joke. A 12 to 13-year-old boy could actually cultivate to a 3-star combat emperor? How shocking was his talent? Could it be that this boy was Madman's target? He looked at Madman again. He was not angry at the boy's offense. Instead, he laughed and said, "Boy, don't have such a bad temper." The boy glanced at Madman and then said to the other children, "Let's go back to the village first." "Okay." Immediately, the group of children followed behind the boy and ran back to the village. Madman did not care and jumped into the stream. Lying in the water, he looked at the boy's back and asked, "Qin Feiyong, how is that boy?" "Very good." Qin Feiyong nodded. "Can you only use very good to describe him?" "Back then, when I was 12 to 13 years old, I was only a combat king. His talent is better than mine. But this is not the main point," Madman said. "Not the main point?" Qin Feiyong was slightly startled and asked suspiciously, "Then what is the main point?" Madman squinted his eyes and said, "The main point is that he has opened the door of potential." "What?" Qin Feiyong's pupils shrank and hurriedly asked, "Which level did he open?" "The 4th level," Madman said. "What?" Qin Feiyong was in disbelief. "Opening the 4th level of potential. Doesn't that mean that this boy has broken through the warrior realm, martial master realm, martial ancestor realm, and combat king realm?" Madman said again. Moreover, he did not rely on the potential pill. He relied on his own ability. Hearing this, Qin Feiyong's mind rumbled. Relying on his own ability to break through the extreme realm? This was too shocking. Wait. Qin Feiyong suddenly realized an important point and looked at Madman in surprise. Madman raised the corner of his mouth and said, "Are you wondering why I know about the potential pill and the potential pill?" Qin Feiyong did not answer or deny it. "You will know in the future." Madman smiled mysteriously. Qin Feiyong looked at Madman deeply and asked, "So we came here this time for that child?" "Yes." "That's not right either," Madman said. "What do you mean?" Qin Feiyong frowned. Why did it sound so contradictory? According to Shangguan Fenglan, this child's talent was not very good when he was young. It can even be described as mediocre. But then one day, he mysteriously disappeared. The villagers searched thousands of miles in order to find him. In the end, after about half a month, they finally found him at the edge of the land of Extreme West. It was from then on that the child's talent changed. In terms of talent alone, this child can definitely be ranked in the top 10 in the entire northern region, Madman said. Chapter 2096. The Far West Land? Qin Feiyong frowned. Madman said, "The Far West Land is not far from here. It is one of the forbidden areas of the North region." "I understand. The reason Shangguan Fenglan asked you to come this time is to investigate the reason for this child's talent transformation," Qin Feiyong said. "That's right." Madman nodded. Qin Feiyong asked suspiciously, "Then how does Shangguan Fenglan know about this child's situation?" One had to know. This place was close to 20 teleportation altars away from 9 Heaven Palace. And the North region was so big and there were so many people. That child was obviously a low-key person. But how did Shangguan Fenglan know so clearly? "You don't know. My 9 Heaven Palace has always been secretly looking for talents, especially those with especially good talent. And just half a year ago, someone from our 9 Heaven Palace happened to come here and heard about this child's situation. When Shangguan Fenglan received the message, she sent someone to investigate this child." But Madman couldn't help but frown when he said this. "But what?" Qin Feiyong asked. "In the past half a year, Shangguan Fenglan sent a total of 12 law enforcers, but these people all disappeared after entering the Far West Land." Madman said. "All disappeared?" Qin Feiyong was surprised. Madman nodded and said, "Yes, none of them came back. They probably died in the Far West Land." Qin Feiyong asked, "What are their cultivations?" "About the same as me," Madman said. "I'll go." Qin Feiyong was secretly speechless and said angrily, "Then why did you ask me to do such a dangerous mission?" Madman raised his eyebrows and said angrily, "I'm taking care of you, understand?" "Taking care of me?" "I really can't tell." Qin Feiyong snorted coldly. "Think about it. This child entered the far west land and his talent seemed to have changed. There must be some treasure hidden in the far west land. If you're lucky and we find it, then wouldn't it be yours? Madman said. I don't need it. Goodbye. Qin Feiyong shook his head and took out an altar without hesitation. Lunatic was an existence that surpassed a divine lord. As for the enforcers, their strength was similar to lunatics, which meant that they had surpassed a divine lord. Even experts surpassing the divine lord realm couldn't come back alive, let alone a mere perfect realm war god like him. Why don't you try? The madman stared at him with an unfriendly expression. Let's go then. Qin Feiyong said. Sure. However, the moment you leave, I will expose your identity. Madman smiled mockingly. Qin Feiyong's body stiffened. He looked at the madman helplessly. Can you just let me go? I just want to cultivate peacefully and then find my ancestor. I have nothing to do with the ancient world or your 9-heaven palace. No. The madman shook his head. There was no room for negotiation. Qin Feiyong glared at him. The madman ignored him. Qin Feiyong sighed helplessly. He put away the teleportation altar and sat beside the madman. He pondered for a while and said, Since that young man went to the far west land, why don't we let him lead the way? According to Shangguan Fenglan, we don't know what happened to that young man. It is said that he was in a coma when he disappeared. The madman said. Then how do we find him? Qin Feiyong frowned. That's why I brought you here. Aren't you very good at dealing with Feng Yuan? Help me think of a way. The madman said. What can we do? Qin Feiyong was speechless. Wait. Suddenly, Qin Feiyong seemed to have thought of something. He frowned and said in surprise, Is there such a possibility? The treasure we guessed might be in that young man's body? No. Shangguan Fenglan had already sent people to secretly observe the young man, but they didn't find anything. The madman shook his head. Then it seems that we can only start from this young man. Qin Feiyong pondered. Since he couldn't run away, he could only try his best. After a long time, Qin Feiyong's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of light. He asked, Have you ever suspected that the young man might not have been in a coma when he disappeared? Not in a coma? The madman was slightly stunned and frowned. You mean that young man is lying? Qin Feiyong said, We can't rule out this possibility. There is indeed such a possibility. But he's just a child. Why would he lie? The madman was suspicious. Maybe it's because he knows that this is very important, or maybe someone is teaching him behind his back. In short, the most important thing is to find out whether he lied or not. Qin Feiyong said. How? The madman asked. Qin Feiyong said with a smile, I have a way, but I want to ask, what benefits can I get? Benefits? I helped you and Shangguan Qiu earn 1 billion soul stones this time. Is it not enough? The madman said angrily. Qin Feiyong was shocked. How did the madman know about this? The 4 symbols infinite divine pill. Only those idiots would believe that it was developed by some bullshit master. The madman sneered. What else do you know? Qin Feiyong raised his eyebrows. Not much. But these pills, I know basically all of them. The madman said. Qin Feiyong was shocked. You also have the pill formulas for these pills? I'm not an alchemist. What do I need these pill formulas for? The madman pursed his lips. Qin Feiyong rubbed his forehead and said weakly, If I had the ability, I would definitely kill you. The madman said disdainfully, Unfortunately, you don't have the ability. Qin Feiyong shook his head and smiled bitterly. He had never been so powerless before. Qin Feiyong said, Since you want to follow my method, then there's no need to pretend anymore. Just enter the village. Enter the village directly? Won't this seem like we're bullying the weak? The madman said. Big brother, how many times have you bullied the weak in 9-heaven palace? Now you're pretending to be a good person? Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes at him, then jumped up and landed at the entrance of the village. I am a good person. Otherwise, who knows how many times you would have died? The madman muttered. He got up and rushed to Qin Feiyong's side, sending a sound transmission. No matter what you do, I won't say a word. Just don't expose our identity as a disciple of Nine Heaven Palace. Okay. Qin Feiyong nodded. With that, the two stepped into the village. The group of children from before didn't run far. They were playing not far from the entrance of the village. And there were many women and old people in the village. Before, Qin Feiyong and the madman didn't enter the village. They had a very calm attitude and didn't even pay special attention to them. But now, when the two entered the village, the villagers immediately stood up and looked at Qin Feiyong and the madman with hostility. The older boy frowned. Didn't I tell you to wash up and leave? Leave. The corner of Qin Feiyong's mouth lifted as he stepped in front of the boy. The boy immediately retreated in panic. What do you want to do? The adults in the village all had a change of expression as they quickly flew over. Boom. Qin Feiyong didn't want to waste his breath. His divine aura rolled out like a huge wave and instantly enveloped the entire village. This is divine aura. You're a war god. The villagers panicked as they looked at Qin Feiyong with fear in their eyes. Don't worry, I won't hurt you, Qin Feiyong said indifferently. Then, he stretched out his hand and the boy uncontrollably flew in front of Qin Feiyong. Let me go, the boy roared, his eyes filled with unyielding. I admire your gaze. However, the current you is still too weak. Qin Feiyong used grievance to imprison the boy. His hands formed a seal and a puppet seal quickly appeared. Immediately after, as Qin Feiyong waved his hand, the puppet seal entered the boy's head like lightning. A heart-wrenching pain suddenly spread out from the boy's sea of consciousness and engulfed his whole body. The boy howled in pain as his slightly immature face was directly distorted. After controlling the boy, Qin Feiyong didn't delay and immediately began to read the boy's memory. The boy's name was Long Tianyu, 13 years old. His parents died and he was raised by his grandfather. But 2 years ago, the boy's grandfather unfortunately lost his life under the claws of a fierce beast, so the boy was now an orphan. But the villagers were very good to him and took care of him like their own son. So in these 2 years, the boy had lived a very happy life. And a 13-year-old boy didn't have many memories. After about 100 breaths, Qin Feiyong's eyes suddenly burst out a ray of light. In the boy's memory, he saw a gray castle. The castle was located on a glacier and exuded an extremely terrifying aura. And the time when the boy went missing was in that gray castle. What? All of a sudden, Qin Feiyong's body trembled as a deep disbelief climbed up his face. What's wrong? Madman stepped forward and asked. Qin Feiyong waved his hand and removed the puppet seal. He took a deep look at the boy and turned to look at Madman, saying, I know where it is, let's go. Madman was stunned for a moment before revealing an excited expression and quickly followed. As for the boy, looking at Qin Feiyong's back, his little face was pale. Although he didn't know what Qin Feiyong did to him, the pain from before made him feel as if his soul was being torn apart. It would be unforgettable for the rest of his life. Tianyu, are you okay? How do you feel? When Qin Feiyong and Madman left the village, the villagers immediately rushed to Long Tianyu with a face full of concern. Thank you, uncles, aunts, grandpa, grandma, for your concern. I'm fine. Long Tianyu shook his head and looked at the back of Qin Feiyong and Madman. His hands slowly clenched together as he muttered, One day, I will definitely become an expert like them. Outside the village in the forest, Qin Feiyong lowered his head and didn't say a word along the way. The disbelief on his face also didn't dissipate for a long time. What exactly do you know? Madman frowned. Qin Feiyong stopped and pondered for a moment before raising his head to look at Madman, saying, That child didn't rely on his own ability to open the door of potential. What? Madman was extremely shocked. Qin Feiyong said in a deep voice, It's the potential pill and the potential pill. Impossible. Madman shook his head. I also think it's impossible, but this is what I saw from his memory. It can't be wrong, Qin Feiyong said. Chapter 2097. Even the people of Nine Heavens Palace and Treasure Pavilion didn't know about the existence of the potential pill and potential pill. It could be seen that in the entire ancient world, only he and Mu Tianyang had the recipe. But Long Tianyu had obtained these 2 pills in the far westland. This was such an unimaginable thing. The madman asked, What else did you see in his memories? Qin Feiyong said. A gray castle. When he went missing, he was in that castle. So you're saying that it was that ancient castle that caused his talent to change? The madman was surprised. From his memories, I saw that he saw a gray figure in the gray castle. But this figure was very blurry and I couldn't see his face clearly. Qin Feiyong said. Gray castle? Gray figure, the madman muttered to himself as a cold light appeared in his eyes. If that's the case, Long Tianyu was really lying. Qin Feiyong's eyelids twitched. This guy couldn't be thinking of killing him, right? He hurriedly said, he's just a child. Is there a need to be so calculative? What? Why would I be calculative with a brat? I just admire this kid's guts. He actually dared to lie to someone from Nine Heavens Palace. But this matter is getting more and more interesting. Let's go. We'll immediately enter the far west land and find that gray castle. I want to see what the hell is hidden inside. The madman laughed. This, Qin Feiyong hesitated and said, I think we should report it to Shangguan Fenglan first. Why report it to her? The madman was suspicious. The gray castle isn't simple. It seems to have the ability to steal life and erode the soul. I'm worried that with our strength, we might not be able to stop it. Qin Feiyong said. It's fine. I'll protect you. The madman waved his hand and swept Qin Feiyong towards the west. Qin Feiyong could not help but smile bitterly. He knew that this madman would not listen to his advice. The land of extreme west was the same as the heavenly dragon sea. It was impossible to directly teleport in using altars, and it was also impossible to send messages to the outside world. In other words, once one stepped into the far west land, it was equivalent to stepping into a cage that was isolated from the rest of the world. As they got closer to the far west, the temperature gradually dropped. About half an hour passed. Finally, towering mountains and rivers entered their line of sight. The temperature here had already dropped to 5 or 6 degrees, and one could even see some snow in the mountains. At the top of one of the hills stood a broken stone tablet. The stone tablet was more than 10 meters tall. Below it were piles of dead branches and leaves. There were 4 ancient words engraved on it. The land of the far west. Qin Feiyong glanced at the stone tablet before turning to Madman and asking, Have you been here before? No. Madman shook his head and said, But I've heard a lot about it. It said that it snows all year round and the environment is extremely bad. As he spoke, he raised his head and looked towards the depths of the land of the far west. He could vaguely see the land covered in snow. Are you sure you don't want to inform Shangguan Fenglan? Qin Feiyong asked. You're not even afraid of Fengyuan. Why would you be afraid of this place where birds don't lay eggs? Madman's face was full of disdain. Big brother. Is this a place where birds don't lay eggs? This is a forbidden area in the northern region. Those law enforcers who are as strong as you can't even come out alive, let alone us. Qin Feiyong was displeased. All right. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. Madman did not allow any explanation. He grabbed Qin Feiyong and rushed into the land of the far west. Qin Feiyong was helpless and could only point the way for Madman. After reading Long Tianyu's memories, he also knew the direction and location of the Grey Castle. As they went deeper, the snow on the ground became thicker and thicker. At first, they could still see some plants stubbornly growing in the snow, but in the end, the entire land became white. The temperature gradually dropped to dozens of degrees below zero. If it was an ordinary person, they wouldn't be able to withstand such a low temperature for long. But Qin Feiyong and Madman, one was a perfect war god, an existence that surpassed the divine lord realm. So for now, they were not a threat to them. However, a doubt gradually rose in Madman's heart. He turned to Qin Feiyong and asked, How did Long Tianyu find the Grey Castle? Qin Feiyong said, It was the Grey Castle that came to find him. What? Madman was stunned. According to his memories, when he was still mediocre, he wanted to enter the land of the far west to find opportunities and fortunes. Because the nearby villages have an ancient legend that there are countless miracles and treasures in the land of the far west. So, he wanted to try his luck. But when he entered the land of the far west, he couldn't withstand the cold and fainted. And just as he was about to freeze to death, the grey figure appeared and brought him to the castle, and taught him cultivation and battle arts. From then on, Long Tianyu treated the gray figure like a master and was respectful. Qin Feiyang said. So that's how it is. Madman suddenly understood and asked. Then Long Tianyu lied because the gray figure taught him? Yes. The gray figure told him not to reveal his information to anyone who asks. Qin Feiyang said. Madman pursed his lips and said. So cautious, it doesn't seem like he's a good person. I don't know if he's a good person or not. But his strength is definitely not ordinary. Qin Feiyang whispered with a trace of worry on his face. When he entered the land of the far west, he had an uneasy premonition in his heart. It was as if something bad would happen soon. Unknowingly. The two had already gone hundreds of thousands of miles into the land of the far west. The current temperature had already dropped to a few hundred degrees below zero. At a glance, it was all glaciers and snow. There was no sign of life at all. Qin Feiyang could already feel the coldness. But the temperature was still falling. Madman's speed was very fast. Even if Qin Feiyang activated the Xing character art and teleported, it was still less than 1/10 of his speed. 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Qin Feiyang didn't know how far they had gone into the land of the far west. In short, even he couldn't withstand the current temperature. His body was stiff and his face was pale. His hair, eyebrows, and skin were all covered in frost. Madman saw that the situation wasn't good and hurriedly used his divine power to form a large barrier to block the cold outside. Qin Feiyang whispered, Fortunately, there are no beasts here, otherwise it would be difficult to move. How can there be beasts in this damn place? Madman said. However, before his voice faded, boom! A glacier collapsed in front of them, and snow flooded in all directions like a flood. The two were shocked. Roar! Accompanied by a deafening roar, a beast the size of a mountain rushed out of the snow. It was a frost ape. Its body was hundreds of feet tall. On its shoulders, there were 9 heads. Every head was like a small mountain. Their blood-red pupils flickered with savagery. How is this possible? Madman was dumbfounded. What's wrong? Qin Feiyang was surprised. Madman said in surprise. Its cultivation is the same as mine, half a step into the divine realm. The same as yours? Qin Feiyang's face couldn't help but turn pale. It didn't come out, but when it came out, it was a terrifying existence comparable to Madman. How could they continue? Because the appearance of the frost ape meant that there were no beasts in the land of the far west. On the contrary, the beasts here were even more terrifying than the ones in the Sky Dragon mountain range. The frost ape stood in front, its 18 eyes flashing with incomparable ferocity. Its ferocious aura shook hundreds of thousands of miles of glaciers. It shouted, Human, this is a forbidden area, leave quickly. Forbidden area? The madman came back to his senses and the corner of his mouth lifted. His aura erupted like a volcano and surged out. However, the frost ape's eyes were filled with disdain. Damn, you dare to look down on me? Seeing the frost ape's eyes, Madman couldn't help but be furious. He waved his hand and his divine power roared as he pounced at the frost ape. The disdain in the frost ape's eyes became stronger. Boom! Suddenly, it waved its thick arms and punched at Madman's divine power. Accompanied by a loud explosion, the divine power was shattered by the frost ape's punch. Madman took a few steps back, his face pale. So strong? He stared at the frost ape in shock. In the past 6 months, there have been more than a dozen humans like you that entered the land of the far west. Their strength wasn't bad, but they all died in my hands. The frost ape sneered. A human like me? Madman paused. Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice, Could it be the enforcers sent by Shangguan Fenglan? I'm afraid it's them. Madman muttered as he rubbed his forehead and sighed. It seems that I underestimated the danger of the land of the far west. It's not too late to turn back. Qin Feiyang transmitted his voice. He didn't want to come in. It wasn't that he was a coward, but because this matter had nothing to do with him. So there was no need to follow Madman and take the risk. Turn back? Madman sneered as he stared at the frost ape and said, I'm afraid you found the wrong target this time. Qin Feiyang, go hide in the space divine item. I'll play with it. Madman licked his lips as fighting spirit boiled in his eyes. His body also emitted a terrifying aura. Qin Feiyong was helpless to the extreme. He originally wanted to persuade Madman to leave, but he didn't expect that it would arouse Madman's fighting spirit. It was basically hopeless to persuade him to leave. Forget it. Let this fellow do as he pleases. Qin Feiyong flashed and disappeared without a trace. Madman waved his hand and the barrier blocking the cold current also collapsed. Voila! As soon as the barrier disappeared, the murderous aura around Madman turned into a blood-red wave that surged toward the frost ape. The void was destroyed and glaciers collapsed. The entire area immediately turned blood-red, as if it was the purgatory of Azura. In fact, one could even vaguely hear the roars of malicious spirits. The frost ape's pupils shrank. How many massacres did he have to go through to have such a terrifying murderous aura? It decisively stopped underestimating him. Boom! Its aura was released and its ferocious aura shook the world. As it waved its claw, a wave of divine power roared in the sky and blasted toward Madman's murderous aura. Boom! In an instant, divine power and murderous aura collided. In an instant, the sky collapsed and the earth cracked. The void millions of miles away shattered as if it was the end of the world. Chapter 2098. Roar. At the same time, painful roars could be heard from the glacier behind the madman. The madman paused for a moment before turning his head to look behind him. He saw one beast after another roaring from the bottom of the glacier. They weren't the companions of the 9 ice apes. There were all kinds of beasts. As soon as these ferocious beasts appeared, they fled in panic without looking back. Qin Feiyong, who was in the castle, also noticed this scene. Only now did he understand that it wasn't that there weren't any beasts on the way here. It was that these beasts were hiding under the glacier and didn't dare to come out after sensing the madman's aura. And now, the moment the madman and the 9 ice apes fought, these beasts felt the danger and naturally didn't dare to continue hiding. This also meant that the Far West was more terrifying than they imagined. Compared to the dozen humans before, it's really different. The 9 ice ape looked at the madman and muttered, but then a trace of disdain appeared in its eyes. Boom! Taking advantage of the fact that the madman's attention was on the other beasts, it took a step forward and stomped towards the madman like a giant. Beasts also know how to sneak attack? The madman was stunned. Then he raised his arm and punched out. Boom! His punch landed on the sole of the 9 ice ape's foot. Compared to the mountain-like feet of the 9-headed frost ape, his fist was like an insignificant speck of dust. However, the power of his punch sent the 9 ice ape flying, and the sole of the ice ape's foot was torn open. The 9-headed frost ape let out a pained roar and ruthlessly smashed into an ice mountain. The ice mountain was tens of thousands of feet high, but under the impact of the 9 ice apes, it was instantly flattened like a dead tree. How is this possible? The 9 ice ape climbed up from the ice and looked at the madman in disbelief. As a beast, its body was naturally stronger than a human's. And living in such a cold place all year round, the toughness and strength of its body would gradually increase. So, whether it was its body or strength, it had absolute confidence. But it didn't expect that it would lose to a human at this moment. I said, "You found the wrong opponent this time. I can't be compared to those trash." The madman's black hair fluttered in the wind. His entire body emitted a battle intent that shook the heavens. Whoosh! He crossed the void with a single step, and his fist shone with divine light. Like a shooting star he punched out. The 9 frost apes were unconvinced. They also swung their strong arms and punched out. Rumble! The 2 fists collided. A wave of destructive energy spread out in all directions with them as the center. Crack! Following closely, an ear-piercing sound echoed throughout the area. The 9 frost apes immediately retreated in panic. As he retreated, he howled in pain. Its arm had been fractured. 2 ghastly white bone spurs pierced through his flesh and skin. Blood gushed out like a fountain. What the hell is going on? How can a human's strength be so strong? Yi Zichen muttered to himself. The 9 heads and the 18 eyes were all filled with shock at this moment. That's it? I haven't even used 1% of my strength yet. The madman walked step by step towards the 9 frost apes. His footsteps were steady and powerful. The void collapsed one after another. His aura shook the heavens. The 9 frost apes revealed a look of fear. He hadn't even used 1% of his strength and he was already so powerful? Then how terrifying was this person's peak strength? Suddenly, it glanced around, then turned around and fled deeper into the forest. The madman was stunned. It hadn't even started and it was already running away? How boring. He pursed his lips and withdrew his aura. He looked around and said indifferently, "Come out." Not long after his voice fell, Qin Feiyong appeared beside the madman. The madman condensed another divine power barrier to isolate the cold current outside. Qin Feiyong smiled. "You haven't had enough yet, right? Isn't that nonsense?" The madman rolled his eyes. This level of battle wasn't even enough for him to warm up. "Don't worry. There will definitely be stronger beasts behind." However, at this point, Qin Feiyong hesitated. The madman looked at him and said impatiently, "If you have something to say, then say it." Qin Feiyong smiled. "Look, facing a beast of this level, I can't help at all. Instead, I will be a burden to you. Less nonsense. Since you've boarded my pirate ship, don't think about getting off." Before Qin Feiyong finished, the madman gave Qin Feiyong a mocking smile. Then he forcefully brought Qin Feiyong and continued to fly deeper. Qin Feiyong was furious. To be honest, facing a beast of this level, his cultivation wasn't much help. He couldn't understand why the madman was dragging him along. About 100 breaths passed. Suddenly, Qin Feiyong's expression changed. He stared at the glacier ahead as if he had seen a devil. His eyes were filled with fear. The madman was also slightly taken aback. But then, his eyes were filled with excitement. "He is indeed a battle maniac," Qin Feiyong muttered. The glacier ahead wasn't some rare treasure. It was a frost ape. Moreover, it was the 9-headed frost ape that fought the madman before. Its broken arm was still bleeding. Those 9 pairs of millstone-sized eyes were all suffused with a terrifying ferocious light. But this wasn't the reason why Qin Feiyong was terrified. The real reason was that behind the 9-headed frost ape, there were another 15 frost apes. They also had 9 heads. Their size was the same as the 9-headed frost ape from before. And the aura they emitted was also the same. In other words, they were all super existences that surpassed perfect monarch god. "Senior brother, you play slowly. I'll leave first." Qin Feiyong swallowed his saliva. After saying that, he went straight into the castle. What a joke. Adding the 9 frost apes from before, there were a total of 16 of them. With such a terrifying lineup, if he stayed outside, only death would await him. "You're scared to the point of pissing your pants. Really useless." The madman snorted. Qin Feiyong, who had entered the castle, heard the madman's words and was so angry that his nose was about to become crooked. Which perfect war god wouldn't run when they saw 16 half-step monarch god beasts? Not to mention a perfect war god. Even a perfect monarch god could only run at the sight of them. "It's him. Brothers, let's kill him together." The injured 9-headed frost ape let out a resentful roar and charged at the madman with a terrifying aura. The other 15 frost apes also roared and charged at the madman. "If you can force me to take a step back, I'll admit defeat." The madman crossed his arms and stood in the air. He looked at the 16 frost apes with disdain. Arrogant. The 16 frost apes roared like thunder. They waved their mountain-like fists and smashed at the madman. The madman sneered. He clenched his fists and charged forward. Bang bang bang. Rumble rumble rumble. Accompanied by loud sounds, the 16 frost apes were sent flying in less than 5 breaths. Their arms were all broken. All of them grimaced in pain. But more than that, they were terrified. Especially the 15 frost apes that came out later. They were terrified to the extreme. This power, this physical body. Why was he so ridiculously strong? They didn't believe it when they heard the first frost ape talk about the madman. How could a human's physical body and power compare to these beasts? But the result was even more terrifying than what the frost ape said. Inside the castle, Qin Feiyong's face was also filled with shock. Last time when they sparred on Turtle King Island, he already knew that the madman's physical body had been tempered. It wasn't a problem for him to crush a middle-grade divine weapon with his bare hands. But he found that the madman's performance this time was even stronger than last time. It was probably comparable to a high-grade divine weapon. In other words, the madman now could probably crush a high-grade divine weapon with his bare hands. He might even dare to fight against a perfect divine weapon. However, it hadn't been long since the last time they sparred. How did he improve so much? Was the madman hiding his strength from the beginning? Or could it be that he had some kind of special method that allowed him to temper his body? Outside, the madman really didn't take a step back. He was like Mount Tai. His black hair fluttered in the wind. The blood-red divine power around him was like a tide that rolled in the void. Looking from afar, he was like a demon god. His killing intent was shocking. Just this bit of skill. Looking at the 16 frost apes, his expression was filled with contempt. Roar! These words completely enraged the 16 frost apes. They faced the sky and roared, shaking the surroundings. Following closely, waves after waves of heavenly energy poured out and turned into waves of cold air that drowned out the sky. Immediately, the snowstorm in this area was even more intense than before. The cold currents were bone-chilling. A layer of ice appeared on the madman's body. If Qin Feiyong was outside right now, there was no doubt that he would turn into an ice sculpture and freeze to death. Divine technique? The madman muttered. The ice on his body was getting thicker and thicker. Even his 4 limbs were starting to go numb. If he just stood there without moving, even with his cultivation, he would definitely be completely frozen in less than 3 breaths of time. Gotcha! The madman was trapped in the cold current, so he was naturally clear of this point. Waves of killing intent broke out of his body. The ice on his body began to crack slowly, accompanied by a series of ear-piercing cracking sounds. What? We can't freeze him. Just how strong is the killing intent in his body? The 16 frost apes were shocked when they saw this scene. They had never seen a human with such a shocking killing intent. Not enough, far from enough. You don't even have the qualifications to let this father warm up. All of a sudden, the madman roared and the ice on his body shattered. He jumped up and landed on the head of one of the frost apes. Boom! He stomped down. With a cracking sound, one of the frost apes' heads exploded like a watermelon. Flesh and blood splattered. The surrounding ice and snow instantly turned blood red. The remaining 8 heads of the frost ape howled miserably. His heart was also filled with fear that could not be dispelled. This human was like a god descending to the mortal world. He was so strong that it made them despair. Chapter 2099. Run! The frost ape that had appeared first suddenly let out an explosive roar, turned around, and began to flee. The frost ape that had one of its heads crushed and the other 14 frost apes didn't dare to stay any longer and fled for their lives. This time, we won't be as lucky as before. The madman chuckled and waved his hand, sending out a ray of golden light. The ray of golden light was like a strand of hair, but its lethality was extremely terrifying. Whoosh! The golden light streaked across the sky like lightning, shattering one head after another. The 16 frost apes were all killed in less than 10 breaths. The mountain-like corpse fell into the snow, and blood flowed out like a small stream. Terrifying. Inside the ancient castle, Qin Feiyong's heart trembled. Last time, it was this ray of golden light that broke the blood flash formed by the kill formula. But what was this ray of golden light? He still couldn't figure it out. Outside, the madman casually clapped his hands, and the golden light disappeared into his body. Then he looked into the void and said, "Did you see that? With me here, you'll be fine." Qin Feiyong appeared beside Madman and praised him without holding back. "Impressive, impressive." The madman smiled proudly and pointed at the 16 frost apes. "Take these corpses." Qin Feiyong paused and asked suspiciously, "Why should I take their corpses?" "Nonsense. Of course, to the resource hall to exchange for soul stones. These beasts are all half-step paragon gods. Whether it's their blood or bones, they are all very valuable. Even if you don't lack soul stones, you can sell them to the treasure hall. You can sell them for a sky-high price." The madman said. "I see." Qin Feiyong's heart moved. He took out an unused interspatial ring and put the 16 frost ape corpses inside. "How dare you? How dare you hurt my subjects?" But just as Qin Fei Yong put away the interspatial ring, an angry roar came from the void in front of him. Merely that voice contained an oppressive might that caused Qin Fei Yong to feel fear. Qin Fei Yong hurriedly raised his head to look. Immediately, he saw a golden flowing light breaking through the air with a speed that was hard to catch with the naked eye. What followed was a monstrous divine power. This divine power had already surpassed the 16 frost apes. The madman was also shocked and shouted, "Damn, it's a beast emperor that just became a paragon god. Run!" Hearing this, Qin Fei Yong didn't hesitate to turn around and escape. "You're too slow." Madman grabbed Qin Fei Yong and used a supplementary divine art, disappearing in the blink of an eye. "Where do you think you're going?" However, the golden light was not shaken off by them. Instead, it was getting closer and closer to them. In other words, the speed of the golden light was even faster than Madman's. "Why are we so?" Madman angrily glanced at the golden flowing light behind him. He looked at Qin Fei Yong and said, "Don't you have a spatial divine item that divine sense can't capture? Let's go in and hide." Qin Fei Yong was a little hesitant. The madman urged, "Hurry up. If you don't go in, I won't be able to protect you." Qin Fei Yong let out a breath. With a thought, he brought the madman into the black tortoise realm. Swish! Just as the two of them disappeared, the golden stream of light swept over and appeared in the void. It was a golden ape. But compared to the 16 frost apes, it was much smaller. It was about the size of an adult, about 1.78 meters tall and only had one head. The golden fur on his body was like satin. But at this time, its golden eyes were filled with anger. Divine sense surged and covered all directions. "Damn humans. Do you think you'll be safe by hiding in a spatial divine item?" It uttered a roar. Wisps of golden god force burst out of its body and swept across the place like a surging tide. Millions of void, earth, and mountains were all shattered. This world turned into chaos, as if it was the beginning of the world. But soon, the golden ape frowned. If it was a spatial divine item, then even if it was shattered, there should be fragments. However, his divine sense hadn't detected anything. What was going on? Inside the black tortoise realm, the madman stood in the sky above the herb field and looked around curiously. Qin Fei Yong looked at the golden ape in the image with a worried expression. The golden ape was too strong. He was worried that the black tortoise realm might not be able to withstand it. But it seemed that he was worried for nothing. The black tortoise realm didn't shake at all. Another moment passed. Seeing that the black tortoise realm was still fine, Qin Fei Yong finally let out a sigh of relief. Qin Fei Yong, in the future, it's best not to provoke experts at the level of paragon gods. But at this moment, an angry voice sounded in Qin Fei Yong's mind. Qin Fei Yong was stunned. This seemed to be the voice of the little boy? "What's wrong?" he asked in his mind. "Do you think the black tortoise realm is really fine?" "Let me tell you, it was I who used the origin power to stabilize the black tortoise realm, preventing it from being destroyed," the little boy said angrily. Hearing this, Qin Fei Yong was shocked. In any case, with the current strength of the black tortoise realm, it can't directly clash with experts at the level of paragon gods. Otherwise, it will consume a large amount of origin power every time, the little boy said. In other words, the black tortoise realm isn't really incapable of clashing head-on with experts at the level of paragon gods? Qin Fei Yong asked. If it's really a head-on clash, the black tortoise realm can still withstand it. However, it's better to avoid this kind of thing as much as possible, because the consumption of origin power will affect the growth of the black tortoise realm. The little boy explained. Qin Fei Yong said, "Then when will the black tortoise realm be able to fight with paragon gods without any scruples?" "Judging from the current growth rate of the black tortoise realm, it shouldn't be long. I'll tell you when the time comes," the little boy said. "Okay. I'll try my best to avoid it in the future," Qin Fei Yong secretly said. The little boy responded and then didn't say anything else. And outside, the golden ape roared angrily and also disappeared into the depths of the far west. Qin Fei Yong exhaled. He finally avoided this calamity. Wait. Origin power, rule power. Is there a difference between these two things? Qin Feiyong frowned again. Suddenly, Madman's doubtful voice sounded in Qin Feiyong's ears. Qin Feiyong, is this really a spatial divine item? Qin Feiyong was slightly stunned, turned his head to look at Madman and nodded. Of course. Then why are there so many people and beasts? It feels no different from the outside world. Madman frowned. Qin Feiyong's pupils shrank slightly. This person's insight was really terrifying. He smiled and said, the people here are basically the clansmen of my subordinates. Do you think I'm stupid? How can there be so many clansmen in that family? Madman said angrily. Don't move. In my world, a slightly larger tribe has millions of clansmen. Qin Feiyong said. So it's like this. Madman nodded in realization. Seeing Madman still looking thoughtful, Qin Feiyong immediately realized that he couldn't let this person continue to stay in the Black Tortoise realm. The Black Tortoise realm wasn't comparable to others. Even the alchemy scripture, the 6-word divine formula, and the ancient castle couldn't be compared to the Black Tortoise realm. Because the Black Tortoise realm was an independent small world. Once exposed, it would definitely attract countless people to snatch it. Even the people of Nine Heavens Palace would probably force him to hand over the Black Tortoise realm. That monkey has already left. Let's go out. After Qin Feiyong finished speaking, he didn't wait for Madman to react and left the Black Tortoise realm. The bone-piercing cold current surged over. A layer of ice immediately appeared on Qin Feiyong's body. What a burden. Madman glanced at Qin Feiyong and shook his head. He formed a divine power barrier to isolate the cold current. After Qin Feiyong melted the ice, he said angrily, I am a burden to begin with, can you please let me go back? No. Madman shook his head. Who did I offend? Qin Feiyong was extremely angry. Don't be angry, it's just a joke, let's go. Madman chuckled and continued forward with Qin Feiyong. Qin Feiyong stared at Madman and looked ahead. His expression suddenly changed and he hurriedly said, Wait, you still dare to go like this? Aren't you afraid of meeting that monkey again? Then how do you think we should go? Madman was suspicious. Qin Feiyong said, Nonsense, of course we'll take a detour. That's fine. Madman thought for a moment and nodded. Then, he led Qin Feiyong away from the route and flew to the left. After a while, seeing that there was no danger, Qin Feiyong couldn't help but ask curiously, Is Paragon God the realm above Divine Lord? Yes. Madman nodded. Qin Feiyong said, Is it the same as War God and Divine Lord? Yes. It's all elementary, minor, major, perfection, and perfection. Madman said. What about above Paragon God? Qin Feiyong said. Above Paragon God? Madman muttered to himself and shook his head. Even I can only look up to experts of that level, don't even think about it, break through to Divine Lord first. Qin Feiyong curled his lips and said, I don't think you're that good. You can only run away when you meet a beast at elementary Paragon God. Say that again? Madman's body stiffened and he immediately stopped in the void, staring at Qin Feiyong with hostility. Am I not telling the truth? Qin Feiyong looked at Madman without fear. What do you know? Do you know the difference between half-step Paragon God and elementary Paragon God? It's like the difference between false god and war god. Without some heaven-defying means, it's impossible to cross this threshold. Of course. It's not that I don't have the ability, I just find it troublesome. Madman said. Keep bragging. Qin Feiyong sneered. Bragging? Madman was furious and said, If you have the guts, then make a bet with me. How? Qin Feiyong asked. I'll go find that damn monkey right now. If I can't beat it, I'll listen to your orders from now on. I'll do whatever you want me to do. But if I win, you'll give me that spatial divine item. Do you dare to bet? Madman provoked. Chapter 2100. Hearing this, Qin Feiyong couldn't help but be tempted. This madman's strength was obvious to all. It was a great temptation to listen to him in the future. However, he really didn't dare to gamble. Because Madman was too confident. And he also knew that Madman's strength was far more than this. Although the temptation was great, The price was also great. If Madman really defeated the golden ape, then he would have to give the black tortoise world to Madman. This wasn't a good deal. Don't be like a woman. Just say it. Do you dare to gamble? Madman said. Ha! Qin Feiyong laughed dryly. Senior brother, I was just joking. You took it seriously. Joking? If you don't dare, then you don't dare. Why find an excuse? Madman's face was full of disdain. Qin Feiyong smiled and quickly changed the topic. He asked curiously, how long does it take to cultivate from a half-step paragon god to a beginner paragon god? How long? Madman murmured and continued to move forward with Qin Feiyong. After a long time, he shook his head. It depends on one's talent. Those with good talent can take hundreds of thousands of years. Those with average talent can take millions or even tens of millions of years. Those with good talent need hundreds of thousands of years? Qin Feiyong was dumbstruck. He asked, then what if we have enough soul stones? That's a different story. If there's a time array, then it's even better. In short, once you break through to the War God realm, you will be in seclusion for hundreds or thousands of years. When you break through to the Monarch God realm and Paragon God realm, you will be in seclusion for even longer. Tens of thousands of years is common. Just like the 9 elders of our Empyrean Palace. From the time I entered Empyrean Palace until now, I have only seen them a few times. Madman sighed. Tens of thousands of years. Qin Feiyong was dumbfounded. Because of the ancient castle, let alone thousands or tens of thousands of years, he hadn't even tried to cultivate for decades. In his opinion, it was too long. It was too boring. Cultivating in seclusion all day. What fun was there in life? The path of cultivation is like this. The higher the realm, the more boring it gets. Great Elder kept urging me to go into seclusion, but I just wasn't willing. Madman pursed his lips. Qin Feiyong asked curiously, how long has it been since you became a half-step paragon god? How long? Madman pondered for a moment and said, probably 7,000 to 8,000 years. 7 or 8,000 years. Qin Feiyong's mouth twitched. When Madman broke through to the half-step supreme god realm and dominated the 9-heaven palace, he wasn't even born yet. In that case, this fellow was also an antique. Wait. Suddenly, Qin Feiyong frowned. Madman had broken through to half-step paramount god 7 or 8,000 years ago. At that time, it seemed to be the time when the ancestor's reputation was rising. And it was at that time that the ancestor went missing. In other words, when the ancestor entered 9-heaven palace, he met Madman. When Qin Feiyong thought of this, he was immediately bewildered. He had always thought that Madman was a junior in front of the ancestor. He had never seen the ancestor in person, only heard rumors. However, he never expected that Madman and the ancestor were from the same time period. The meaning was completely different. Because if Madman was only a junior, then he definitely didn't know much about the ancestor's deeds. After all, the rumors were more or less untrue. But as people from the same time period, he definitely knew the ancestor's background. In other words, this Madman knew everything about the ancestor. Qin Feiyong looked at Madman and asked with a pleading tone, Senior brother, can you tell me why my ancestor disappeared? Madman glanced at him, shook his head and sighed. After thousands of years, if I had cultivated seriously, I would have broken through to the half-step supreme god realm by now. Qin Feiyong couldn't help but be angry. I'm asking you a question. You ask me and I have to answer you? How much face do you have? Madman's face was full of disdain. Qin Feiyong was infuriated, but a sense of powerlessness soon followed. If it were anyone else, he could think of a way to force the other party to say it. But this Madman, although he looked unrestrained and frivolous, was actually a scheming old fox. Coupled with his terrifying strength, he really couldn't do anything. Roar! The following journey was not as smooth as the beginning. From time to time, a ferocious beast would run out, and their strength was extremely terrifying. The weakest was half-step supreme god. Half-step supreme god ferocious beasts were also common. This extreme west has really exceeded my expectations. The degree of danger should be comparable to the depths of the heavenly dragon sea. Madman had long stopped underestimating the place. His mind was highly focused, and he would immediately flee if there was any movement. Just as he said, It wasn't that he couldn't win, but that he was afraid of trouble. After all, once he fought with a ferocious beast, it would attract other nearby ferocious beasts. Time flew by. The sky gradually darkened. The night in the far west was covered by dark clouds, and the moon couldn't be seen. Everywhere was pitch black. Qin Feiyong and Madman became more and more careful. Roar! Beast roars sounded in the night sky from time to time. At first, it was nothing, but late at night, the two of them sensed a ferocious beast even more terrifying than the golden ape in the glacier ahead. This won't do. We have to go around, Qin Feiyong said solemnly. Its aura was even more terrifying than the golden ape's. Without a doubt, the ferocious beast hiding under the glacier was definitely a half-step supreme god. Madman didn't dare to be careless and immediately led Qin Feiyong around the glacier ahead. But soon, the two of them stopped again. Madman's brows were tightly furrowed. Qin Feiyong had a look of fear. Because no matter how they went around, they would always encounter ferocious beasts stronger than half-step supreme god. Looks like we have to stop here. Qin Feiyong was silent for a moment, then turned to look at Madman. Because it was obvious that they had already entered the depths of the far west. The ferocious beasts they would encounter next would probably be at the half-step supreme god level. Unless they had absolute confidence in their strength, they wouldn't be able to continue. Madman scanned the front, his face full of unwillingness. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he said to Qin Feiyong, "Why don't we use the spatial divine item to travel?" "You want to go in so badly?" Qin Feiyong frowned angrily. Madman smiled and said, "We've already come this far. Wouldn't it be a pity to give up halfway?" Qin Feiyong shook his head helplessly. Madman said, "Don't dilly-dally. Quickly take me to your spatial divine item." "Go to my spatial divine item?" Qin Feiyong was taken aback and frowned. "Why, don't you have it?" "This?" Madman's expression stiffened as he smiled embarrassedly. "I really don't." Qin Feiyong didn't say anything. He just sneered at Madman. Did he think he was an idiot? How could a half-step supreme god not have a spatial divine item? "I'm not lying to you. I used to look down on spatial divine items," Madman said. "Look down on?" Qin Feiyong was stunned. "That's right. Only a coward who's afraid of death would prepare a spatial divine item and be ready to escape at any time," Madman said. "What kind of logic is that? Who said that a spatial divine item is for escaping? There are other uses for it, okay?" Qin Feiyong was speechless. All right. Hurry up," Madman urged with an awkward expression. "You really don't have a spatial divine item?" Qin Feiyong still didn't believe it. Who didn't know the benefits of a spatial divine item? This guy definitely wanted to enter the Black Tortoise world again and take the opportunity to observe it. "I really don't. If you don't believe me, use your divine sense to search. If you find it, I'll give it to you," Madman said. "Really?" Qin Feiyong asked. Come. Madman opened his hands and didn't have the slightest intention of resisting. "I still don't believe it." Qin Feiyong muttered and released his divine sense, pouncing towards Madman. "You're really searching?" Madman's face darkened. A divine sense appeared and blocked Qin Feiyong's divine sense. "Nonsense. You're the one who asked me to search. Why? Are you feeling guilty now?" Qin Feiyong sneered. "Who doesn't have a secret? I really don't have a spatial divine item. Why don't you believe me?" Madman said powerlessly. "Don't give me that." Qin Feiyong sneered. Now, he naturally wouldn't believe it. Madman was instantly annoyed and said angrily, "Brat, don't go too far. If you provoke me, I'll really announce your identity." "You?" Qin Feiyong was furious in his heart. Other than threatening him, what else could he do? As a 7-foot man, isn't he ashamed? "Hurry up," Madman shouted impatiently. "I really owe you in my previous life." Qin Feiyong glared fiercely at Madman and then helplessly brought him to the Black Tortoise world. "That's more like it. Perform well like this. Maybe if I'm happy, I'll tell you everything about Qin Batian and Lu Zhengyang." Madman stood in the sky and looked at Qin Feiyong with a smug face and smiled. Who are you trying to fool? Qin Feiyong sneered and controlled the black tortoise world, silently shuttling through the night sky. This spatial divine item, the more I look at it, the stranger it becomes. Madman crossed his arms and looked at the black tortoise world, muttering thoughtfully. Don't let him see anything. Qin Feiyong muttered to himself and was quite worried. In fact, he had thought of bringing Madman to the castle. But the castle couldn't be exposed. Because the castle's time laws were easier to distinguish. Once they entered the castle, Madman would definitely be able to sense the abnormality of time, which would be even more troublesome. Moreover, alchemy scripture, 6-word divine art, fire lotus, mermaid princess and others were all in the castle. He really didn't dare to take this risk. Sure enough, it was as expected. The deeper they went, the stronger the beasts they encountered. As for how strong they were, Qin Feiyong couldn't judge. Because he still didn't understand the existence of the Paragon God level. However, just the aura emitted by those beasts made him feel a fatal threat. In this place, if one didn't have enough strength or protection, they would definitely die. Around late at night, Qin Feiyong gradually discovered that the aura of the beasts seemed to be getting less and less. What was going on? Wait. He suddenly remembered the information he got from Long Tianyu's memory. Chapter 2101. According to Long Tianyu's memories, after entering the hinterland of the far west, there would be fewer and fewer beasts. Because the Grey Castle was in the hinterland. And because of the existence of the Grey Castle, the entire hinterland was filled with a strange power that could steal life and erode the soul. It was because of this power that the beasts of the far west did not dare to enter the hinterland. Even if they entered the hinterland, they did not dare to stay for long. In other words, it was very likely that they had already entered the hinterland. Madman. Qin Feiyong turned his head to look at Madman, and the anger in his heart immediately rose. Not long after this guy entered the black tortoise world, he took out an armchair and lay on it, leisurely taking a nap. As if these things had nothing to do with him. Madman slowly opened his eyes, looked at Qin Feiyong, and said, Don't be so rude, call me senior brother. Look at you now, how do you look like a senior brother? Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes at him and said, Stop talking nonsense, let's go out and take a look. Go out for what? Madman was stunned. Qin Feiyong said, I estimate that we should have already entered the hinterland of the far west. I want to go out and confirm it. For such a small matter, can't you go out by yourself? Why did you call me? Madman glared at Qin Feiyong and closed his eyes again. Who is coming to the far west? Qin Feiyong was furious. He stepped forward and grabbed Madman, and appeared above the glacier outside. You? Madman could not help but be angry, but before he could get angry, a trace of surprise crawled on his face as he scanned the surroundings. In this world, he really did sense an invisible force. This power had an extremely strong penetrating power. It could actually ignore his physical defense, enter his body, steal his life and erode his soul. As expected, we have reached the hinterland of the far west. Madman muttered. Why was it so quiet? Why didn't Qin Feiyong say anything? When he looked at Qin Feiyong, his expression changed drastically. He saw that Qin Feiyong had already turned into an ice sculpture. The madman hurriedly waved his hand and a barrier appeared. However, although there was a barrier separating the cold current, the ice on Qin Feiyong's body did not show any signs of melting. Don't tell me he's already dead. The madman's eyelids twitched as he realized he had been careless. This was the hinterland of the far west, and the cold current was countless times more terrifying than outside. Let alone Qin Feiyong, who was a perfect war god. Even a half-step divine monarch like him felt his body stiffen. Boom! He hurriedly circulated his divine power to melt the ice on Qin Feiyong's body. Several breaths later, the ice finally melted. Qin Feiyong shivered and curled up. He looked up at Madman and said angrily, Do you know that I almost died? Are you blaming me? Madman pursed his lips. Who should I blame if not you? Qin Feiyong's eyes were red. The moment he came out, his consciousness was swallowed by the cold current and his entire body fell into darkness. He didn't even have time to enter the black tortoise world again. In those few short breaths, he had truly felt the aura of death. Isn't it fine now? Don't be like a sissy and make a fuss. Madman glanced at Qin Feiyong with disdain and then scanned the void again. His brows gradually furrowed. I'm a sissy? Qin Feiyong was so angry that he went crazy. What kind of person was this? He was almost frozen to death and he was still mocking him like this? I'll endure it. Qin Feiyong took a deep breath and suppressed the grievance in his heart as he scanned the surroundings. Immediately. His eyes were also filled with bewilderment. The barrier formed by Madman blocked the fatal cold current, but it couldn't block that invisible force. It was a bit exaggerated. It could even penetrate a barrier made of divine power? Madman frowned and turned to look at Qin Feiyong. We seem to be sure that we shouldn't have come to this place. You only know now. Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes. Why don't we go back now? Madman said. You must be joking. We've already come this far and we're still going back. Qin Feiyong said. Now, his interest was piqued. Madman chuckled and said, if that's the case, then let's go. Qin Feiyong was about to bring Madman into the Black Tortoise world. But at this moment, the little boy's voice sounded in Qin Feiyong's mind again. Qin Feiyong, you can't come to the Black Tortoise world again. There was a tone that didn't allow for discussion. Why? Qin Feiyong was stunned and asked in surprise. The penetrative power of this force is beyond imagination. If you don't use your origin power, even the Black Tortoise world won't be able to block it. The little boy said. So terrifying? Qin Feiyong was shocked. The little boy said, you can try going to the castle. The castle is a heaven-defying divine artifact with the power of law. It might be able to block it. Qin Feiyong hesitated. Let's go. What are you still standing there for? Seeing Qin Feiyong standing there motionless, Madman couldn't help but urge him. I can't go. My spatial divine artifact can block the corrosion of this force. Qin Feiyong shook his head. Madman was stunned and frowned. Then what should we do? How would I know? Qin Feiyong said angrily. He wasn't omnipotent, so why ask him everything? Then let's try walking for a while. Let's see how strong this force is. Madman frowned and suggested. That's the only way. Qin Feiyong nodded. In short, he would never bring Madman to the castle. Although Madman had been helping him during this period of time, who knew Madman's true purpose? It was better to be on guard. The two converged their auras and flew deeper into the castle at their fastest speed. As they went deeper and deeper, they could no longer sense the aura of the beasts. But the invisible force was becoming more and more terrifying. At first, the feeling of seizing life force and eroding the soul wasn't too obvious. But gradually, Qin Feiyong and Madman could clearly sense it. After about 1,000,000 miles, Qin Feiyong's face suddenly lit up. He pointed to the glacier in front and shouted, Look, the Grey Castle is in front. Madman looked up and was slightly stunned. Other than the endless glacier, there was nothing else in front of them. Where is the castle? Are you seeing things? Madman looked at Qin Feiyong and frowned. No way. Qin Feiyong rubbed his eyes and looked again. There was indeed no castle. What was going on? Madman looked at Qin Feiyong and his face suddenly changed. Not good. It should be that force that has already eroded your consciousness, causing you to hallucinate just now. Hallucination. Qin Feiyong was shocked. It seemed that his consciousness was indeed in a trance. You can't go any further. Madman stopped and said in a deep voice. Qin Feiyong was a little unwilling. Then should I just give up like this? Madman pondered for a moment and said, Your space divine item should be able to hold on for a while. Go in and hide first. I will go take a look alone. Is this okay? Qin Feiyong was a little worried. It's okay. With my cultivation, I can still hold on for a while. After Madman finished speaking, he turned into a stream of light and disappeared from Qin Feiyong's sight without looking back. Qin Feiyong's eyes flashed and he also entered the castle. Everyone was cultivating in seclusion. Qin Feiyong didn't disturb everyone and silently sensed the castle. In the end, he found that the castle could really block the erosion of that force. He finally let out a sigh of relief. After pondering for a moment, he drove the castle and chased after Madman. He definitely couldn't catch up. After all, Madman's speed had far surpassed his. However, He was more and more curious about the mysterious gray castle. Qin Dage. Suddenly, Fire Lotus opened her eyes and walked to Qin Feiyong's side. During this period of seclusion, Fire Lotus had also broken through to perfect war god level. What's wrong? Qin Feiyong turned to look at Fire Lotus and asked with a smile. Fire Lotus looked at the glacier outside through the image in the void. She shook her head and said worriedly, "You shouldn't have followed Madman here." Qin Feiyong was slightly taken aback and asked, "You know this place?" "I heard people in Ninth Heaven Palace say that the danger level of the Far West is comparable to the depths of the Sky Dragon Sea. Even if an absolute god came in, they might not be able to leave alive." Fire Lotus said. "I see. With the castle and Black Tortoise World, it should be fine." Qin Feiyong smiled comfortingly. "You're too optimistic." Fire Lotus shook her head and looked at the glacier outside. She let out a low sigh in her heart. At the same time, Madman sped along. His face was no longer as frivolous as before. It was incomparably serious. That was because that strange power was far more terrifying than he had expected. The vitality in his body was quickly draining. His soul was also being eroded. Suddenly, he looked at an ice mountain in front of him. That ice mountain was more than 1,000 feet high. At the peak of the mountain stood a black-haired old man. Grand Elder. Madman was taken aback and hurriedly flew towards the ice mountain. He shouted from afar, "Old man, why are you here?" However, the Grand Elder did not answer. He just smiled at him and waved at him, as if calling him over. A trace of suspicion crept up Madman's brows. But suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. He slammed on the brakes and stopped in the void. He rubbed his eyes and looked up again. The Grand Elder and the ice mountain had both disappeared. It really was an illusion. Madman's heart trembled. It seemed that even his consciousness was beginning to be eroded. But there was not even a shadow of the gray castle. "Do I really have to give up?" Madman muttered to himself. Suddenly, he turned around and looked at the void behind him. His eyes flashed and in the next moment, he disappeared without a trace. Space Divine Item. If Qin Feiyong was here, he would definitely run out and find Madman to settle the score. He clearly had a Space Divine Item, but he was still hiding it? Unfortunately, Qin Feiyong was still far behind and did not have the chance to see it. At the same time, in the central area of the hinterland, a huge gray castle stood on top of a glacier. It was surrounded by white snow. However, there was no snow on top of the gray castle. There was not even a piece of frost to be found. At this moment, a gray figure was standing on top of the castle, looking ahead. He was looking in the direction of Qin Feiyong and Madman. "I didn't expect someone to break in. It seems that the existence of this sovereign has already been known." The gray figure muttered and disappeared again. Not even a trace was left, as if he had never appeared. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.